whole notion of this standard series with KVEC is, I mean, even today, I think, I can almost get downhearted. I'm sure you're in the same position that here we are speaking to one another, and most of our districts are either closed or on an NTI day. And so, but we know that our moments of time with our students are so precious, especially right now. And we know that their futures and their successes academically, and also their well-being is so dependent upon school. And so from the academic piece of this, the standards notion is that, how do we make our time with them count? And so a lot of our districts, I know one that I think it was maybe 60 new teachers that's close by, and across our whole region, we've got large numbers of new teachers. And so some of us that's been in this for quite a while, we realize maybe a lot of things are the same with standards that we've seen before, and then there's some differences. And so we can tend to get complacent thinking that everyone knows what we've been exposed to, but standards may be brand new for a lot of our teachers, and then even our experienced teachers. I mean, there's changes that have happened, and then we need those experienced teachers engaged to help bring along our younger teachers. And so our time with our students is so precious that we've got to be very targeted. So to speak, the hammer has got to hit the nail right on the nail head, and every strike has to count. And so knowing our standards well and being able to move between and through them, and look at them in ways that we can be most efficient with their instruction, and almost allow students to learn more with less time. And that's always a hard thing, and that's a hard thing for us to process. But the best chance we have of that is making sure that we are absolute experts and masters of those standards. And so that's the notion of the standards work. We started with the first series in December with Kim Sargent with social studies, and social studies drew a big crowd, especially because the new assessment is this year. We'll have mathematics today, reading and writing coming in February on the 16th, and then March 10th, we'll do science like this. But all of this feeds into a master plan for you guys as a district and schools in your curriculum development. I've got to know my standards first, but then do we have at least a plan, a curriculum map? Do we have an idea of what's happening across our grade levels, within our grade levels, so that when all of us are striking the nail head, we're hitting right on it all together? And that's probably the hardest piece many times, is to be able to find the time to do those kinds of things. And so there's basically, I believe I can say that there's probably 4 pieces of today's training. The first is just for an idea of architecture. And for some of us, that's going to be old hat with these standards, but there's a lot of us on this call that may not be living and breathing mathematics standards, but yet they're a big part of helping all this to come together in the curriculum work. So we want to do a pretty short piece, but a piece on architecture. And then Stephanie's going to come along with us with a deep dive into the standards for mathematical practices. And the standards for mathematical practices, I would probably say, in my opinion, is probably the least understood, or maybe the least dealt with on a deep level. And so she's going to help us to do that. And then we've got an exercise in breaking down a standard. Now, for all of us that's been doing this a while, what have we had? We've had deconstructing standards, breaking down a standard, unpacking standards. It's all essentially the same thing. And, Stephanie and I talked ahead of time too, that, we're not ones that would ascribe to that you're going to find the time to break down every single standard in a committee type atmosphere across your whole district. But the notion of breaking down a standard is that if you run a teacher through that exercise of thinking in that manner, each time they go to review a standard or to think about what lesson I'm to teach next, they kind of, well, if they can get that process ingrained in them, it's going to help them tremendously in being able to move forward and be efficient in their instruction. And so then the last piece is the assignment review protocol. So if I can break down a standard, then what about when I give a student an assignment? what are the thought processes I'm going through to make sure that assignment is actually doing what I hope it does? And then that's address the standard. And so this is a lot. It's a lot to try to bite off today, and we're just going to do the best we can. We're not going to try to be rushed to get it all. We'll stop where we can get to, and then we'll address future learning that you can do with that as well. But that's kind of our intro to this. Stephanie, is there anything I should add to that?
No, you did wonderful.
All right, excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of get into, I think I have to click. Yeah, there it goes. We'll go ahead and get into the slides, and it'll just help me to kind of keep thinking about the notions that we want to put before you today. And so what I just described to you about the 4 components we're going to go over, that's essentially what we're doing today. But that's what's on this slide, and that's the goals that we want for you today. And then essential questions, I'll call these guiding questions that you can be thinking about in the back of your mind is, how are the state standards now different from what we've had in the past? Now, if you're a new teacher to this, don't worry about it. Just go with what you've got. But for our experienced teachers, it's those differences that they probably definitely want to focus on. And then how might the new components of the architecture support teachers and engage students? And so you can keep these questions in the back of your mind. So as with all standards, and I've thought in my mind, wouldn't it be great if all our subject standards had the same words as far as structure and had the same look and these kinds of things. But I know that each subject has its own details that probably draw that out to be different. And then the committees work in separation from one another. So there's words that we've got to understand. So with the mathematics standards, we actually reference 2 standards in terms of phrases. There's standards for mathematical content, and there's standards for mathematical practice. And so those are typically abbreviated SMPs. And so standards for mathematical content is what we would probably traditionally think of as standards. It's what you need to know, what you need to focus on with your teaching. Standards for mathematical practice, however, is those dispositions and attributes and approaches that we have in trying to do mathematics. And so all of this, of course, came from originally a lot of the work out of, what is it, CCSSO, I may have that acronym wrong, and then the NCTM work that happened. And so these terms have been around for quite a while. And then there's things like grade level overviews, domains and clusters and conceptual categories. So I'm going to try this analogy. This is probably a bad one, but I'm going to try it. I want you to think about standards for mathematical content as a group of marbles. Now, I may have lost my marbles in trying to think of this as an analogy, but I'm going to try it. And so I also want you to think about different colored marbles. And since we're in Kentucky, what are we, a blue and red state? I don't know, I'm not talking politics, I'm talking basketball and that kind of thing. And so we have what, red and blue. So since we're on this end of the state, let's just focus on blue marbles. And so we've got this big collection of marbles, and I want you to think again about those marbles as these standards for mathematical content. So these are the individual standards that we're to teach. And so I'm looking at the blue marbles, and among those blue marbles, there might be light shaded blue marbles. There might be medium shaded blue marbles. There might be dark shaded blue marbles. Now, it's not important that I broke those into 3 different levels, just that there are some different shaded marbles. Let's just do 3 for the example. And so among those light shaded marbles, we think of them as a collection that have a similarity, right? There's something about them that is similar to one another. And so those light shaded marbles, I'm going to collect a few of those in my hand, and I'm going to call those a cluster. And so just like with our mathematics standards, things that are alike or similar to one another in the content, we group them together and call them clusters. And so those are those light shaded blue marbles. Well, okay, so now let's think about that. We have light shaded blue marbles, medium shaded blue marbles, and dark shaded blue marbles. We'll now take those 3 shades of blue, and all those together come together as what? As blue marbles. They're all blue, they're just different shades. Well, call that a domain of marbles. Okay, and so these different clusters that we have of, say, light shade of blue, medium shade of blue, dark shade of blue, they can come together and also be similar in ways to one another, and we call that a domain. So domain is kind of a larger umbrella or a collection of marbles, blue marbles in our case, and then those light shaded or medium or dark we think of as clusters. So we have domains and clusters within the mathematical content. Well, we got to confuse it more. So there's domains in kindergarten through 8th grade. We have things called domains. And so we're going to see kindergarten standards, and then we're going to have domains. And under each of those domains, we're going to have clusters. That'll be kindergarten through 8th. But when we get to high school, things are a little different, because everybody kind of can teach high school content a little differently. Some people do algebra 1, algebra 2 geometry, some do integrated math. Maybe these standards are appearing in different places. And so instead of domains, instead of grade levels, we have something called conceptual categories. So we normally have kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, but in high school, we're going to have conceptual categories like geometry or functions or things like that. And so I'm going to let that analogy lie, except for one additional thing. The standards for mathematical practice, how does that fit into this analogy of marbles? So if I've got all this collection of marbles, maybe I want to know what size some of them are. Maybe I want to know how much some of them weigh. You know, there's these different attributes and these different things that I like to do to engage with marbles. Maybe there's certain ones that I like to play with this particular game or what have you. Well, standards for mathematical practice are those things that I do to engage or learn about those marbles. And it's the same way with mathematics. Standards for mathematical practice are those attributes, those things that I'm doing and in ways that I engage the mathematics. And so if that made no sense to you and you don't like the marble analogy, we're still going to be kind of just quickly hitting on some of that going forward. Just stop real quickly though to say, do you have any questions about that? Does that make sense? And you interrupt me later if I move on and you want to ask a question. Okay, and so we've got all of these terms kind of down, but then within the standards, there's overviews. And so the different overviews are by grade level, like we just talked about with the way that the standards are arranged, but the overviews are more like summaries. It's kind of like a preface to the rest of the standards. It's kind of this one place you can look and kind of get an idea of the overall picture, so to speak. And so for kindergarten, this is on page 16 of your standards document. And so you could open it from our participant resources folder and look at these later too. As you get into breakout sessions, you'll want to do that. But let's talk about what's on this overview. So Stephanie, can you see the cursor move as I move it? Okay, I think I saw it. Yeah, okay. So I see that there's a kindergarten overview up top. And so we would imagine that going through 8th grade, but then this first row is the domains. So remember in the analogy of the marbles, that's the blue marbles as a collection. So what we can imagine is this first domain is like blue. Maybe this is like red. Maybe this is like green. Of course, there's not enough colors for me to keep going, but so domains are listed here, and then what's underneath them are the clusters. And so imagine if this is the red marbles, then maybe this is light red, medium red, and dark red. I should say that differently. This is the domain. Yeah. So this would be like the clusters underneath, same analogy that I just gave. And so each domain has different clusters underneath it. And so we're going to see this replicated over in the standards as we look at those. And then underneath this, if you notice this statement, it says in grade K, instructional time should focus on 2 critical areas. And then it gives those 2 critical areas. And so this gives us an opportunity to look at where should our time be most focused. And so overviews can be really helpful to us in that way. Stephanie, anything I should add to that? Okay.
Good.
And Okay, and then grade 8 overview, we're going to see something similar. Naturally, it's going to probably look more complex as the grade levels go on, but we still see the same structure of grade 8. We see domains, then we see the clusters that are underneath each of those domains. And then we again see this notion of a summary with where the instructional time should focus. And as I keep going, high school then starts to look a little different. Now, remember, I said that high school, no longer are we looking at grade levels, but these conceptual categories. And so that's what you're going to see is different. And so we see that it's number and quantity, algebra, functions, geometry, statistics and probability, and then calculus. But notice calculus has a plus sign beside of it. Anywhere we see a plus sign happen in the standards, we realize that that is something that we're not really being assessed on. It goes beyond what is required of all students. And so we see that plus sign. So why do they include calculus? Because many of our students may end up in calculus, and anything that we're doing in the lower levels of learning should all be leading to what students may do in the future. So we see that. So conceptual categories, their overview looks just slightly different, but not very much different. You no longer see a grade level, you just see a conceptual category, which in this case was geometry. And then we see the domains and then the clusters under each. And then we see something that pop up that we haven't talked about yet. There's something called modeling standards. And so modeling standards only are marked or indicated in the high school. Now, modeling standards, and I know Stephanie and I've talked about this, modeling happens across all grade levels. But within the standards, modeling is only indicated in the high school. And so I'll give you a good example here recently, our weather. Have you ever been watching the weather and you've noticed something said about a European model or this model or that model? Well, they're using mathematics to try to mimic or to predict what the weather will be. Well, that might not be a good example to give us a great deal of confidence in modeling, but there are definitely examples out there where modeling can be very exact. And then those are examples there with weather. If it's better than just holding your finger in the wind and kind of guessing. And so anywhere there's a standard that lends itself to modeling, you're going to see a star. And so that's what this is saying. And then the plus standard is saying what I just said earlier, that these are standards that are not required by all, but they are standards that students would need to know to be able to advance to, say, calculus, advanced statistics, or discrete mathematics. And then I did include this one about calculus. I know that this is not all students, but I want you to know this is here. Many times when we're offering calculus, it'll maybe be an AP or it may not be, depending on what your setup is. But there is one thing here that we've still not said, and there is a plus plus. So there's just all kinds of things to learn. And so we know that the star is modeling. We know the plus, a single plus, is just that that's content that goes beyond the norm, and it is for students that will go on to calculus and these other advanced mathematics. But then there's plus plus that is even optional for what would be typical in a calculus course. And so just want you to be aware of that. But otherwise, the setup is the same. You see the conceptual category. You see the domains, you see the clusters. You do see calculus come back, though, and say where you can focus your instructional time. If you noticed in the conceptual categories, when committees were doing this, we don't see a great summary that says where you should focus your instructional time. So it's a little different. K8 is a little more useful in that way. Okay, and so just thoughts on this. We're not going to do a breakout with this, but we were thinking about, what the different roles. So we have teachers here today, we have administrators. Many of you are actually parents and guardians, no doubt too, but our families and then our students. Is what is the benefit of an overview in terms of these different roles? Now, what we're going to go on to learn is that standards, let me go to where you see an example, let me come back. our standards are going to actually kind of look like this in terms of the standards pages, but these overviews that we just went over, how are those helpful? Are these things that we just skip and don't look at, or are there things here that we can draw out? And so I'm just going to ask if anybody would help me with that. And you remember, I'm going to say this, you remember in the classroom when you asked a question and nobody answered, how it made you feel? Try to help me with this if you can. What would you think would be useful for any one of these roles? And you can add that in chat as well. And Stephanie and Dion and Doug will help me with that, and Chastity also.
Are you wanting anyone to answer that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I would say for new teachers, it's kind of like a guideline. It gets a little overwhelming. So you going over all of this, like the modeling standards and all of that, this is amazing. But it's a guideline to help you. There's just so many resources out there. So to kind of narrow where you need to focus your content, what you need to teach.
I remember when I first started teaching, I went to one of my elder teachers, I'll call them, and I said, I'm overwhelmed. I just feel like that I don't know what the next minute's going to bring. And she said, just breathe. And she said, I want you to think about what your next task is. Then when you finish that, I want you to think about what your next task is. And so she was trying to draw me away from the big picture and being overwhelmed and get more concrete. And that's exactly what I heard you just say. And is probably a very good anchor point to help with nothing more than, or nothing less than emotions too, with teachers that are entering into this. Excellent. Okay, keep going. Let's take 2 or 3 more ideas.
Johnny, we had somebody put in the chat. I really like it. They said that it's to prioritize, and it's helping to do a scope and sequence of planning.
Excellent. And so this notion of when you're doing your curriculum maps and you're doing this planning, broad planning, bringing that together in that way, yeah, that's huge.
I'm kind of thinking about right now, where our students have been in virtual and COVID, and like possibly, I'm sure everybody's kids are a little bit behind.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the overview, it's kind of like, okay, here's what I need to spend the most of my time, where and how I should spend it. And that overview really helps with that, especially if you've had a new teacher come in and they've had to possibly MAT certified, and not real familiar with how the standards work. That's where I would tell them, go back to the overview. This is where, you need to spend the majority of your time. I don't know if other administrators feel that way or other instructional supervisors, but this kind of helps. Because when you look at that whole page with the domain and the cluster, and then it looks at the standard, then it tells you a clarification. Sometimes that's a little much at one time, especially if they're new and you're trying to get them into teaching what's the most important at that time. This really helps.
That's excellent. It is certainly a lot, isn't it? And now one term or phrase that I've kind of been instructed at times across the state to stay away from is prioritizing standards. Because the politically correct thing will be to always say we have to teach all standards, we can't leave them out. But there is this notion, like you just described, of where do we spend the most of our time, or at least do we emphasize some of our time, and that all comes down to knowing what students have known before, where they're going in order to be able to do that, and then being a master of my standards. But initially, this overview even lets your young teachers get their foot in the door with it. Administrators, what do you guys think? I'll throw one out just to help us. I know as an administrator, when I think about all subject areas, it's hard to know everything about everything. And so if I'm having to look at standards that maybe was not my area of emphasis in teaching, and it's hard for me to walk into a classroom, say for mathematics or any other subject that I'm not as familiar with, and feel like I can contribute and help that teacher, the overviews are a great place for you to kind of do a quick study. I'll call it the Cliff Notes. And so for administrators, the overviews can be a help to you in that way. Families, I think of the same way. I mean, they're going to be completely overwhelmed if they look at these standards that we're going to look at here in a second. And so it can be an overview, and even students in that same way, it gives them an overview and lets them see the forest and instead of looking at each tree separately.
Johnny, when you're talking about families, this would be a great thing to use the overview at parent teacher nights, just so that the parents that are coming in understand the mathematics that's going to be taught that year.
Absolutely. And, you know, sometimes we want to think that our parents in lump sum don't know a lot about a particular subject or something like that, but you're going to have a lot of parents out there potentially that they can contribute to their child's learning in each subject. And some of them even have a passion for it. And so you might light a fire that way. Yeah. Okay, anything else with this? Okay, if not, let's go quickly to this. So this is what Ms. Moore was talking about can be overwhelming. And so after the overviews, we actually get into the particular, I'm going to call these clusters of standards, but they're always fitting under a particular domain. So when I look at this particular standard sheet, that is an example of a second grade cluster of standards here. This first row is called measurement and data, and it says domain. So what would have probably been very smart of me is to take one of these overviews for second grade so you could see it. But if I was at kindergarten, say, and I see counting cardinality, that's what I would see up in that row if I was looking at the kindergarten standard for that, or cluster of standards. And so I see measurement and data. So this is a particular domain within second grade. And then every sheet like this that are the cluster of the standards, will always see this repeated, the standards for mathematical practice. And just keep that on the back burner right now. Stephanie's going to explain more of this to us, but we see that there's 8 standards for mathematical practice. This came about, like I said, with some of the first work with NCTM, and forgive me if I keep butchering the acronym, but CCSSO work when all of this came about. But then cluster, I see work with time and money. So back to our analogy, these are measurement and data is like the whole set of red marbles. And then this particular cluster, work with time and money, is like the light shade of red, you know. And so here's the individual marbles that are light shades of red. And so there's 2 marbles that are light shades of red, or 2 standards that fall with under this work with time and money. And then there's coding, of course. Standards have to get even more obscure. So of course, KY would mean Kentucky, but then we can see here on this window that comes out a little larger is that this 2 represents the grade, just like down here, the 1, and then G down here is the domain. In this case, MD is the domain, which is an abbreviation of measurement and data. And so each of the domains have abbreviations. And if you're familiar with your grade level, you probably start to internalize those abbreviations to where you can just move between them with the abbreviation only. But like us as administrators and families and students, that may be something where we would have to reference that overview to get that. And then after the domain, we see the grade level written, or I'm sorry, not the grade level, the standard number. And so this is the 3rd standard within this particular domain in the 1st grade. So this is the 7th standard within measurement and data in the 2nd grade. And it's one of 2 standards that are clustered together under work with time and money, if that makes sense. And so we have cluster, we have standards, we have coding. Now notice that when we get to high school, this coding changes just a bit. Instead of a grade level, we have HS for that, because remember that it's conceptual categories. It's not grade levels once you get to high school. So then instead of a domain listed, it's a conceptual category. And then under that conceptual category, the particular standard number. So just a little bit different. And so if these 2 standards are referred to as standards for mathematical content, as is all our standards that are in this form. And then right underneath each standard, notice how there is something called MP5, MP6, and so on. Well, notice up here under standards for mathematical practice, we see the same kinds of abbreviations. And so MP5 represents the 5th mathematical practice. So use appropriate tools strategically. MP6, I see attend to precision. So in committee, teachers came together when all of this was being written, and they looked at the standard and they said, which mathematical practices are most directly related to this standard? And so that's what you see listed here, and you'll see that under the next standard. Now, underneath all of this, we see attending to the standards for mathematical practice. So they didn't feel it was enough to just identify what they thought was most directly, but they wanted to give you some ideas of what could be done with these standards that attend to those particular mathematical practices. But here's something I want you to note, and this doesn't actually happen very often, but I don't want you to be confused when you see it happen this way. Notice this says MP5, MP6, MP1, MP5. And I do see down here an example that they give us for MP1, which was up here. But if you notice, and MP6 was also up here. But if you notice, MP8 is not listed up here, but yet they give us an example. And then I see MP4 is listed down here with an example, but it's not up here as what's considered most directly related. So don't get in your mind that these particular mathematical practices are the only mathematical practices that can be used or be thought about with this particular standard. It's just in committee, these are what came out as most directly related. But then in attending to the standards for mathematical practice, we see that we can think about that even with others. Stephanie.
Johnny, the other thing that you may want to think about with that one, like with the MP8, in this case, they talk about the regularities of repeated reasoning and those kind of things. In this standard, we're looking at time. And one of the things that we know for our students is that time involves counting by fives, right? It's a big part of it. And that's part of that repeated reasoning. We may need to back up a bit in our teaching just to be able to make sure our kids understand that. So that's another way that you can look at those MPs and think about what's prior knowledge that they may need to.
Excellent. And that's this notion too, that the game we're in right now where our students have lost maybe some information from the previous years, or I mean some learning from the previous years, or maybe it's not been emphasized as much. And so this notion of mini lessons or mini, just simply addressing that within your teaching. So yeah. Okay, so we've got domain, we've got cluster, we've got these particular standards that were within that cluster. We understand the coding that can happen for this, and certainly that's not going to be internalized for someone until they practice with this and look at this quite a bit. And then we do see that there's this additional area that's attending to the standards for mathematical practice that help to give us additional ideas that we need to think about around these particular standards. So then I come over here to the yellow colored column, and it says clarifications. And so clarifications was a new piece added to our standards that probably can be very, very useful. Not probably, but probably in my mind is maybe one of the most useful things. Is it's actually going to give you maybe some examples of how that particular standard might be taught, or exercises or assignments or things. As you see, students orally tell and write the time from both types of clocks to the nearest 5 minutes, realizing that a clock can be seen as a number. And so there's these clarifications to the standard to help us understand the standard a bit better. But then underneath that statement, notice these hyperlinks. And so we understand that KY1MD3 is a first grade standard, measurement and data, and it's the third standard. But notice it's hyperlinked, and notice in red is KY2MD7, which is the actual standard we're looking at. And then notice after that standard is KY3MD1, which is a third grade standard, measurement and data, and the first standard within that. So what they've just given us is hyperlinks to a previous grade level standard, first grade, to this standard. And then they've given us a hyperlink to the future standard in third grade that is most directly related to the standard we're looking at. And so by clicking on those hyperlinks, teachers can quickly look at the previous and the future so that they can be thinking about how do I need to design my lessons so that I can get students involved with the knowledge they should already know, but then I can also propel them to that next level and front load the information they need to be able to learn at the next grade level. But then notice something else. There's a hyperlink above KY2MD7 that says KY2MBT2. And oh gosh, I forget. NBT, Stephanie, can you remember? It's
dealing with numbers and counting.
yeah, so MBT2, so this is a second grade standard that is not measurement and data, but it's related to KY2MD7. And so then they can take a hyperlink and they can realize that, hey, even within my own grade level standards, there are things directly related to what I'm teaching to right now. So that is a really good opportunity to think about maybe even combining lessons or maybe grouping these things together in terms of efficiency in teaching. So there can be a lot of thoughts around this, but these are called the coherence and vertical alignment piece. I've always thought of this bottom piece as vertical alignment. So I'm talking about first, second, and third. And then the second grade piece, it almost is coherence, but I'll say that some people refer to that in different terms. So you might just want to refer to these two areas as coherence. And so this is a very useful piece. You see that's repeated for the second standard within this cluster. But do notice this. In the second one, there's no hyperlink after grade 2 for this particular KY2MD8. So all that means is there's not a third grade standard that in committee they felt was directly related to this standard. But we do notice there is a standard within grade level that we would want to look at, and we do see a previous. Yep. Anything else with that?
I will add for the special ed part of this, if I've got a student and we know what grade level they're actually on, if I'm needing to write a goal at this point, I'm going to look at what grade level they're on, what's their capabilities, and I may use this coherence piece to go back to where they are so I can actually skip ahead 1 year and write a goal in that area. Remember, we do write goals around our standards just because we need to move our students forward. Now, many times we have to look at where our students are at currently. And so we're going to go back to where they're at, but how are we going to move them forward and what's the areas that we need to work on? And so this is a great way for our special ed teachers to actually know where they're going from where they're at and be able to write really good standard goals for our students.
Excellent.
Another thing, Johnny, as we were talking there about the clarifications, I love the fact that they put these clarifications in here because many of our standards are written with the word and or in it. And many times we tend to push one part of it, not as much as the other part. So this clarification gives you options for different types of problems that you can write, in which actually includes the and the ors in those. So you can start to model from those.
Excellent. Okay, anything else? Is there any questions with this or any additions that anyone else would like to add? This is a lot. And for the first time, if someone's never seen this, this is a lot to take in, and it takes time to internalize all of these things. And like Ms. Moore mentioned earlier about with the overview, starting with that and then engaging them in this process. And then literally they need some time to process and internalize and realize that not everyone just walks into this and it's immediate. Okay, if no other questions or anything to add, let me move on. And so the big piece of this with the architecture is, where are teachers in their learning of architecture? So you thinking as your district, and we'll not do a breakout on this one just to save some time, but I want you to think about where are you, Stephanie, were we going to do a breakout on the next slide? I can't remember. You're muted. What?
Just to give us a few minutes just to
This
put in
is
those information.
Okay, just give a few minutes, but no breakout. Okay, so where are teachers, so what we're going to think about is where are teachers in their learning of architecture? So when you think about your district, you maybe don't have a lot of new teachers, but maybe you do. And so what is your particular environment that you're working within? And now the only thing that we can't assume is if your experienced teachers have never really had the opportunity to do something like what we just went through, you'll have to say that we're assuming that they have the same understanding of the standards that we just learned. And so that's something to think about. But think about, where are your teachers in this? What are we doing about new teachers? How are we ensuring the learning is ongoing? Because this is a never-ending process. And for those of us that have been through this many times, we can tend to kind of get, I guess, complacent, if you will, about not realizing that there are new folks and folks that need this. Yeah. But what we want to do is just give you a couple minutes to just be thinking about understanding the architecture. And so then in our next breakout, you guys can actually maybe hit it, and then some notions on standards for mathematical practice. But let's just take a couple minutes to let you think about that. Is there anything that anyone would add, maybe just a discussion? Just as one question, is new teachers prevalent in your district? Do we have any districts that new teachers is an issue?
Yes, I'm going to be honest. In Perry County, I think we have a new teacher academy where we meet with our new teachers normally, but once or twice a month. And we had 38 new teachers, which is a lot for us. I don't know about all the, the other districts. And like I said, in our other issues, most of them they did not participate like in student teaching. They're in an MAT program, and I'm not trying to say that that's bad or not, but they've had no experiences in a classroom at all. So that's another hurdle that you're having to overcome, besides having to understand the standards. But based on this, I think as a district, I think Stephanie may have talked in the chat, that for math and probably for every subject area, there needs to be a lot of professional development in understanding them and the importance of the standard. Besides, and what's the best way to teach that standard? So, I'm taking notes on what we would need to do for next year, because again, we're probably going to have more new teachers. And in a couple years in Perry County, I'll just be honest with you, we'll probably have almost like a mass exodus, because so many of us can retire. And I know people said, well, aren't you going to stay if we get another rate? No, I don't think people are. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just being honest about it. But that I don't know if other districts are having that same issue, but that's kind of like where we are. And you want to grow teachers. You want quality teachers that have a passion for their job. And sometimes it's hard to get that, but if you have the right training and the resources up front that helps them with their job, then they're more likely to stay. So I'm already making notes about what we can do possibly for next year or summer PD for those that we can get hired, that get hired prior to school starting. We've got new teachers. I've gotten 2 new math teachers that just got hired over Christmas break. So
I'm sure that's happening over other places. I see Pike County put in the same kinds of things. And then Hazard, I like the way you said that, Mr. Glasser. It may not be an issue. And this is so much an individual thing because it depends on the teachers too. But at the very least, for our part, like Ms. Moore said, we want to try to provide those opportunities for them to learn and not just simply leave them to their own devices. And so that's wonderful. And, but yeah, you're talking about in 2 years, take 38 and add on what, so that's a huge turnover. And that's what I noticed Pike say. Anyone else comments or? The thing that we hope today is that the PowerPoint that you'll have in the participant resource folder, and we'll drop that in. I should have actually dropped that in first thing this morning. I'll drop that in when Stephanie takes over. And is that you can take this PowerPoint and pull any slides you want. We did adapt this from a KDE training. There are additional slides that you may want to omit or you may want to use for extra learning. And so we hope that it'll be helpful that way. And then, yeah, you see a link to the agenda and notes is what we're discussing here. So you can add those things in as teams. Anything else that we should talk about here, Stephanie?
The only thing I'm going to say is for many of our new teachers that are coming in, understanding that standard is important, but also knowing how to go back and look at the things that students may need, especially those kids who are in interventions, the tier 2, tier 3 interventions that need to happen, and understanding going back in the standards to look for what's missing. That's a huge key for our students. Every time that we have a student who's moving up in the tiers, making sure they understand the previous, because we do have really good standards that are written in a very good progression. But when we miss out on a part of the progression, we start getting behind. So where are they missing out, and knowing how to back up in the standards?
Absolutely. Now, what we'll do moving forward is with this particular team exercise, we'll try to do breakouts on this, but just trying to save a little time, and then you guys can continue to discuss. Okay, so let me get back to PowerPoint. And I think that this is your part, isn't it, Stephanie?
Yes, this is my part.
Okay.
So what we're going to start out with in our goal for this is a deeper development of understanding of the SMPs, and that's what we're going to do. And Johnny, you took my
I'm sorry.
Okay. And so one of the things that we're going to look at is how are these components of the architect providing support for educators, and how are they working to connect? And again, you're going to see this on there, connect the content standards and the practice standards within the instruction. Well, truthfully, our SMPs are going to be what guides us many times in just what we're planning for our lessons. And so that's how we're going to look at it today. So if you don't mind, Johnny, will you
Yep, coming back.
All
Got
right.
it.
All right. So for this, just as you read this, think about, what's the balance that we're going to have for our content standards and the math practices. We're going to look at the SMPs in general, and we're going to clarify that purpose of the content. And then we're going to identify and integrate those within grade level task. Again, we talked about the task and where these fall, and that's going to be later on. You're going to see this a lot when we do the TNTPs. So let's hold on to that. But first, just take a few minutes, and you may not have any familiarity with the SMPs, but just take a few minutes. There are 8 of them. And write down the ones you remember. You don't have to write them down by number, because many times we don't always remember the number. But please just take a minute and write down the ones that you know before we move on. I'm going to give you 1 minute. Okay, so let's talk about these. Johnny, if you'll move on to the next slide, please.
Got it.
Let's take a closer look at these. He's going to click again, and we're going to see, of course, first one is making sense of problems and persevere in solving them. We're going to talk more in depth about this one. What does it mean to persevere and solve problems? And then, of course, 2 is to reason abstractly and quantitatively. And so 3 is viable arguments, being able to critique others in that. And then 4 is modeling with mathematics. We want to make sure our students are able to model, not just us model. And 5 is using appropriate tools and strategically being able to choose a tool to use. And then also attending to precision. That is very important, because we want our kids to be accurate and understand what they're doing. And then, of course, 7 is look for and make sense of structure. And then our last one is to look for and express repeated reasoning. That's huge. Patterns are everywhere for our kids, and we need to remember that. So for our next one, we want to look at the relationship that happens between the standards of math practices and where that is for us. We want to make sure that they see this throughout. These are not just for, and I'm going to say this, this is not just for elementary, okay? This is for elementary, middle, and high school. Our standards for math practices follow throughout. And then the standards for math content, there's a balance. We also know that our standards for math contents, there's 3 areas that we look at. There's procedural, there's conceptual understanding, and there's application. These are very important for our students. And so in order to understand the purpose and the function of this, we must first understand how the standards for math practices are different in the content standards. So what's it going to look like in each one of our content standards? And then also we need to know that the standard for math practice describes ways in which developing students, practitioners of mathematics should increasingly engage with the subject matter as they grow in mathematical maturity. We want to know that they become expertise in the math in elementary, again in middle school, and then again in the high school years. We want our students to be able to talk about the math, and vocabulary is key in this too. Students are lacking on a topic, just like I talked about before, especially our special needs students, our students who are tier 3, we need to make sure that they're not just relying on a procedure because they have issues with working memory. And with that working memory, if they're just relying on a procedure, many times they miss pieces. So we want to make sure that they truly understand the problems. They're able to represent problems coherently. They're able to justify their conclusions, apply the math to any particular situation. And so that's how these math practices are so important for our students. In short, just the lack of understanding can prevent any student from engaging in the mathematical practices, and we do not want that to happen. All right, now we're going to do a Jamboard, and we're going to drop the Jamboard in the chat. I think actually the S&P Look For's have been dropped in the chat. The Jamboard has been dropped in the chat. You can go to the Jamboard. Now, the purpose of this Jamboard, before everybody jumps off to the Jamboard, is we're going to see how you engage in the SMPs. So, Johnny, what I want you to do is briefly within your group, when you go to this Jamboard, if you can go on to the next page, Johnny, for us, because you're going to be put in groups at this point, okay? I want you to look at the Jamboard. You're going to choose an SMP, and we've got 8 total SMPs, but we've got 15 Jamboards. So, Johnny, if you don't mind, I know you've got a list of the districts there. If you'll assign them a number, and they're just going to look at a particular SMP, and they're going to fill out that Jamboard.
Okay, and then Stephanie, let me make sure am I muted?
You're unmuted,
yeah.
yes.
Okay. Our main room, we want, I guess, just to stay on one, correctly?
Yes, they will be on one. One of the things I want you to do is just, again, highlight words that are important in that. And then, of course, I want you to look and put maybe a little Post-it note on the side of activities that you think would be important for our teachers to do. So that's what you're going to do. I think, Johnny, we've got that on the next page.
Okay, let me go
for them to be able to do.
I can get it to go. Oh,
so we're going to do breakout room and then go on. So when considering the SMPs, think about these things right here that's on the board. So can you share about an experience within the classroom that you've seen the students engaging with that SMP? And then, of course, engaging with the SMPs benefits students mathematically and how. And then think also about, like I said, within that SMP, what is the critical parts of it? So that's just what we want to do.
And the PowerPoint is in your participant folder now. So if you need to go to this slide to reference when you guys go to breakout, you can do that as well.
Oh, it's saying that if there's too many people viewing, it will not open.
Oh, with what?
Our Jamboard.
Oh, no.
I've got people who are actually in there, but it's saying that there's too many people. So
we've
apparently
overloaded
overloaded it.
Can if they open the PowerPoint, they can see these MP1, MP2.
Yes.
So maybe if you guys would open the PowerPoint when you go to Breakout and just go down to your particular math practice in the PowerPoint and then try to do that.
And then put it in the chat.
And then I guess we'll come out of breakouts and then kind of debrief, let them share some things. Is that how that would work?
Yeah, and I also dropped in a second chat to where I pulled the viewing off. It's just sharing now. So if they can do those, we've got people in who's actually working on them. So that's great because I can see them working on them.
So PowerPoint just be a backup then.
Yes, PowerPoint will be a backup, but just take your MP as we put you in breakouts. We're going to do that for 5 minutes. Look at the one that you're with, and just go ahead and in the chat, fill it up with what's important in that SMP. Let's talk about the math practice one, making sense of a problem and persevering. When I look at what most people circled from our Jamboard and some of the things that was put in here, we also understand that it's about explaining the meaning of a problem. It's about looking at where the problem starts and then analyzing the given constraints, but it's also about it's not just simply about jumping to a solution. It's truly understanding the problem and being able to talk about it. The other thing that we noticed that it's about explaining the correspondence between not just equations, but being able to draw things and those kind of activities that we want to do in the classroom. Another thing that it's about is understanding other approaches to solving problems. So we want to make sure that our students have multiple strategies in their toolbox, as we like to say, and they're able to identify and being able to make those connections that they're doing. This practice is in almost every problem that we look at. It's about understanding just the problem. It's teachers encouraging students to work with their current knowledge that they have and then being able to apply that skill. Also, it's about transferring that knowledge and their skill. And then you'll see this, that when they're doing these kind of things, it can happen. When we talk about they simply jump to a conclusion, this happens when we just teach algorithms, okay? It happens when we're just giving them one way to do a problem. In elementary, many times we teach multiple solutions to a problem. We have them to look back and to determine what's another way. And we have math talks and math moves and those kind of things that is provided for our students to help them to understand a problem. We want them to be able to choose their strategy, but also to be able to choose another strategy. And that's part of this making sense of a problem and persevering solving them. So when I talk to teachers about this, I talk to them about what's the prior knowledge? How can I get my students started? And many times I give them one solution to start with, and that is to say, ask the student, what do they see? For many times, I can't be wrong in what I see happening in the problem. So if I can start there, that's a great part of it. And then also just having them talk about their thinking. You know, what's going on? Tell me what you see happening in the problem. And so that can get them started. So Johnny, let's look over now at the look-fors. So this is a wonderful document that you have in your participation folders, and this is the look-fors, and we look at possible student actions, what the students are going to be doing, and then what the teachers' actions are that they're going to do. Again, one of the big things is providing rich, high-quality problems aligned to that standard. Again, we talked about before, Johnny, having that and or in there and making sure we're touching all of that. So this is where that's important. And then we talk about the possible questions to promote that teachers need to ask. Many times for our new teachers, they don't know what questions that need to be asked. So this gets them started. We also have another document that will help you with this. So that's been provided in your participant folder. We're going to talk now about MP2. And then MP2, it's reason abstractly and quantitatively. One of the things that we want to talk about with this one is the words make sense of quantities and their relationship in the problem. That's huge. The other two words that are big in this part is decontextualize and contextualize. So we need to know what those meanings are, and then and basically we need to know that it is habits of creating representations of the problem. So for me, I always talk about the CSA model with all of my teachers. I talk about how we're going to move from concrete, which is the manipulatives we're going to use, to representations, or the semi-concrete, which is the drawings. And then we move on into the abstract. Now, this can be done together, okay? We had somebody who says this is just making sense of the problem. That's true. It is making sense of the problem. Another thing is we want to understand multiple ways of representing that problem and representing numbers. This is important with our place value and breaking down problems and breaking down numbers and them to be able to see it in multiple ways. We want to representation of the problem and consider attending to the quantities inside the problem. We talk about cardinality with this, that they're able to count, but we also want to know that they've got the quantity behind it. And then breaking down quantities, they need to be flexible within the properties. Now, we talk about properties and we start talking about community property, and we talk about the distributive property and being able to break those apart and understanding how to use those throughout. And then, of course, there's an example that instead of long division, maybe they're using the partial thinking, where they take it and they pull it apart and they look at how can I divide that way. Great tasks that include these are some of the Dan Meyer tasks. We also talk about Pam Harris. She's got some great stuff with building powerful numeracy for middle and high school students. Those are some wonderful resources that we can use. So Johnny, can we move on to the look fors for this one? Okay, so in the look fors, if I'm looking at this one, of course, we're going to look at the actions. And one of the big things is properties of the operations, and they need to be flexible within those. If I'm looking at the teacher actions in this, we're looking at solutions in different ways, giving that opportunity. And math talks is a great way to get those solutions. And I'm not talking about math talks in kindergarten, first, second, and third. I'm talking about math talks throughout to where they truly talk about a problem. And if you look at possible questions to promote that teacher, we're looking at all the strategies can be available to that student and being able to choose efficiency with a strategy. But we're also looking at, if you look at number 2 there, it says, how can you represent the problem with symbols and numbers? What are the manipulatives that they can use also? Because for many of our students who have, and I'm going back to my special ed background, who have issues with understanding a problem, starting with those manipulatives is very important. That's a symbol that they can use. And then being able to draw from that manipulative and getting into the semi-concrete part of it. We want them to be able to do that. How can you demonstrate this on a number line? That's important for our students. All the way through, number lines need to be used. We also want to make sure that they have developed a strategy, definitely one, but we want them to have multiple ones. And this is what we're looking at for this one right here in the practice with reasoning abstractly and quantitatively. Now with MP3, let's talk about this one. Constructing viable arguments. Again, I'm going to bring up number talks. I'm going to talk about number of moves. These are very important at this point. And critiquing the reasoning of others, okay? I want you to think in this one about using stated assumptions. They're able to construct an argument about the problem. They're able to look and build and understand the progression of the statements. I'm just going through parts of this. They're analyzing the situation for breaking down the case that they're going to present to you. And they can provide a counter example if they need to. Also with this one, we're going to reason inductively. We're going to think about the effectiveness of the argument. We're going to be able to use our logic. And huge part of this is vocabulary. Vocabulary is essential in being able to construct viable arguments, to be able to critique others. And so vocabulary has to be integrated daily. for them to be able to do this. And we have to create a common math language. That's part of it. And we need to be able to discuss and explain that math. So what are they seeing? What are they doing? Why is this happening? And many times we can start out with, again, it talks about using the concrete, such as objects and those kind of things, but using their manipulatives and say, what do you see happening with the manipulatives when you're doing this problem? And then, of course, we want to develop and build in this whole situation here, communication skills. This is very important for our younger kids. This is very important for our students who are tier 2, tier 3, who do not have that math vocabulary. So this is another reason I'm going to say this. In math class, our vocabulary is limited. It's limited because guess what? They only use it in math class. And for many of our students, if we're looking at vocabulary for this, the word sum, in our case, it means they're adding two things together. But the word sum, when I use it, I want some ice cream, there's no amount to that. I just want some. So we need to keep in mind that math vocabulary is taught in math class. They're not using it outside of math class either. So we really need to push that math vocabulary. And then have students to restate. You know, having students to restate what another person has said helps us to support reasoning within our students. And I'm going to say that especially for our tier 2, tier 3, and our special needs kids, it's important to understand that and be able to restate. So being able to construct that viable argument in class, having them to do partner shares, those kind of things, that's, you should be seeing that when you walk into a classroom at any point in time, at them having some kind of communication. Math class should not be quiet. It's not about just working problems. It's also about discussions. So I won't get on my soapbox there, but also, Johnny, will you look at our look fors now? Some look fors in this one that I really like is asking useful questions. That's what the students need to be doing. They need to be asking useful questions. We also need to be elaborating on basically what's happening inside of it, and then revising our work according to my justification that I just did. And then, of course, for the teacher, the big thing is that last one, opportunities for students to discourse in pairs, in groups, and during whole group instruction, making sure that they have that ability to do that. And then, of course, you have your teacher questions there. So next. If we look at MP4, which is modeling with mathematics, and I could talk all day on modeling with mathematics, it's not just the teacher modeling the mathematics. This is the students are modeling the mathematics. They need to be able to, of course, solve problems that arrive in everyday life. When we relate these back to everyday life, we see a big difference in our students. And we want to make sure that they're writing to describe the situation. Okay, if it's an addition problem, whatever it may be, it's to describe the situation. If they're modeling, it's to describe the situation. And so this is one way that we want to make sure that they're getting that modeling in. If it's a case for middle school, proportional reasoning is a great place that you can start to see that modeling. And in high school, we start looking at the fact of designing a problem for a function. You know, we want them to have the ability to map out their thinking. This is a great place, if I'm modeling with mathematics, to start seeing kids using all kinds of tools. And I'm not just talking about a few tools. I want them to use their skills to problem solve any kind of real world situation. I want them to be able to go over and pick up something, the symbolic models, and be able to turn that into that problem. Those are the things I want them to be able to do. But many times, and this is a great place to do that, I do, we do, you do for explicit instruction. And if you've got tier 2 and tier 3 and even special needs students, many times it becomes a lot of we do together and then moving on. But modeling with mathematics is really the place where we teach through all grades, again, That's huge right there, because we tend to think that we model more in elementary, and we may get out things to model with in middle school and do a few things, and then we lose it in high school. But the really good teachers who know our students, they're modeling throughout. So we want to make sure that our teachers understand the manipulatives that are available to them and what they can do with those. And it's not just modeling with manipulatives, but also with the calculator and those kind of things that they may need, and including different, and we're going to do that today with modeling with Desmos in the graphic calculator. So we look at the look fors on this one. If I'm looking at the look fors for this one,
I'm trying to get
you're
there.
trying to get there. All right.
I'm a terrible co-host. I am so sorry.
You're great. You're wonderful. We're looking for the connections they see. That's going to be a big part of that. We're looking for appropriate tools that they're going to be using, and tools in mathematics change, right? In elementary, our tools may be a lot of concrete manipulatives, but in middle school and high school, they become drawings, they become tables, they become thinking maps. Those are the things that they can use for mathematics. Another thing that we want to look for is the opportunity that the students have, again, solving real world problems. But we also want to look at how do we represent that problem and that solution? How do we talk about the work that's actually happening inside the problem? And then, again, there's some questions for the teachers to ask, which I love. I love that because it gives our new teachers the opportunity to just have some questions in their toolbox that they can put out there. All right. So MP5, using appropriate tools strategically. We have all kinds of tools. Now they talk about in here, concrete models. And concrete models, I want to start out with the bead string. And Melissa Moore can tell you, I am a huge fan of the bead string. Unifix cubes, another huge fan. Two-sided counters. Those things that are easy for our students to use and can be used throughout grade levels. I love those opportunities for our students, but we want them to be able to make, in this case, the student makes the choice of the tool. Okay. It is the student making the choice of the tool. They understand how that tool is helpful. They have insights on what that tool is capable of doing, and also not just what that tool is capable of, but its limitations. They understand when it can't do something. So I want to clarify in this case that tools are and include calculators. Not only does it include the protractor, it includes the calculator, it includes any kind of spreadsheet the student would be doing, a thinking map. They don't have that on there, but thinking maps are awesome for mathematics, and getting students to understand how to use thinking maps is important. So those are just a few things, but the big thing about using tools is it enables our students to visualize, okay, the math and what's happening in the mathematics. And for those kids who need to move things around, those kinesthetic learners that we have, tools are great opportunity for them to be able to understand the math too. Okay, let's look at the look fors. The look fors in this case, a big one is estimating a solution before using the tool. Can they estimate a solution? Can they understand the availability of tools? I always had, as a teacher, tools were available for anybody who needed to use them. They were, my bead strings were hanging on the wall on hooks. Unifix cubes were in a container where kids could just go over and pull out so many at a time. We had protractors available for students if they could use it. Number lines were readily available on the desk at all times, and in their little workbooks. We always had what we called the poor teacher's whiteboard, which was where it was just a blank sheet of paper, but it had just a line drawn on it so they could just start and use. Those are all tools that are appropriate for our students to be able to use. But if they know they're available, and at any point, algebra blocks for my 8th graders was so important, because if they knew they were available and they were just kind of stuck, sometimes I needed to prompt and say, hey, I've seen you do this before with algebra blocks. You want to try it with that? And they would go get it. Many times though, because they knew they were available and there wasn't a stigma in the classroom that, oh, they're using those, or I can already do this way. It wasn't a problem. So whoever needed the algebra blocks could go pick them up and bring them over and use them. That's the kind of classroom that allows all kinds of thinking going on and then allows discussion to happen. So having those tools available and students can just use them at their need. And I will say this, for many people, they think, oh, they're going to get caught on them. They're just going to want to use them. A good example, and keep in mind, I taught K through 8. So a good example of no, they won't, is one of my students who he went every day and he would get his bead string, right? And many times I found out that he was using the bead string for the first few minutes and then he would work through the rest of the problems. It was kind of like we talk about a security blanket for him, but he was only using it for the first few. And then he was like, oh, I'm getting these right. So now I'm very confident in myself. And now I'm not using the tool anymore because I know and understand how to do this problem. Many times though, when I would talk to the student, he would go back to the bead string and show me first. But then when we would move on down, I'd say, explain this one. He had not used the bead string on the problems farther down on the page. And he would be like, oh, well, this is how I did this. And then he would explain it to me again. And at that point, he didn't need the bead string to explain it. That's the kind of thing that we want from our students. So, our next MP, please, which is 6, and this is attending to precision. We want them to have the correct answer, right? We want them to be able to communicate precisely what's happening. Again, this is why vocabulary is so important, right? Because if I can use the vocabulary to talk to you about it, I can use the vocabulary when I'm writing about it. And mathematics has, believe it or not, writing involved to where we need to make sure that they're telling us what's happening in the problem. Now, one of the things is in here, and this is a pet peeve of mine, is the equal sign is consistently and appropriately used, and they know what it means. We had that talk about the equal sign means that it's a balance on both sides, right? It's not just an answer's coming. So many times our students don't understand that, and this is why when we get 3 plus 4 is equal to, and you'll see a little box plus 1, they automatically put 7. They don't even think about that plus 1. Well, later on, when it becomes inequalities and those kind of things, it becomes a problem for our students to be able to think through that. So we want to make sure that they understand the equal sign in this case. Another thing is attending to precision. We want them to think carefully. We want them to pay attention to what's happening within the problem and being able to estimate. Again, this is where this is important, to understand if their answer is correct and then to go back and to see where things are messed up, right? Another thing in precisions is when we create linear equations and they're having to graph them, we want them to be understanding those kind of things and being able to put it on paper for us. So this is very important for our students when we look at the accuracy, the efficiency that they can do things. We want to make sure that they're getting all of that, but we want them to really pay attention to, am I right on being able to get this? I see somebody putting that the equal sign is a common mistake, especially with pre-response questions on the AP. So that's a big concern that we have for all of our students. So if we look on for what we're going to talk about for attending to precision and our look fors, we want to make sure that in this case, explicitly teaching mathematical vocabulary, what a thought. Again, we want to also require students to answer questions with complete sentences, including the units. That's another part of our attending to precision is students don't understand that they need to be looking at the units and understanding that if the units may change for the answer, what do I need to do next? We also want them to be able to decide that when they're estimating and when they're being able to give an exact answer. But another thing that we want to make sure that they're doing is that we want them to have opportunities to check accuracy within their problem. So that's fine. On the look for this. Also, with MP7, this one's huge. Look for, make sense of structure. Well, for one, patterns. And I can't say this enough. Patterns is everywhere. If you notice down through here, it gives us a good example of 7 times 8, and they use the distributive property in this case. They talk about that it's 7 times 5 plus 7 times 3, and how they are able to see that. Well, if we've given them the opportunity to use tools, they may use a 100-dot chart so they can see how to break that 8 into different groups. So in this case, they broke it into, because I'm really good with my 5s, I'm going to use 5 and 3. It may be that they break it into 7 times 5, 7 times 2, and 7 times 1. If they understand that and they're able to do that, that's wonderful. Again, we want them to be able to see that. The FOIL method is one of those things that we've used before. And guess what? It's wonderful, but can they really see what's happening? And for our students who have issues with working memory, remembering all the steps that I have to do, that can be a problem. So using something else for them to be able to do that with. Mathematics, again, I said, is all about patterns. One area that we don't think about, but is an example, is that it's even included in squares and numbers. So showing kids the patterns, making sure that they can see patterns within inside of that, in multiplication, in addition, even division, skip counting, all of those things that have patterns, making sure that they understand that. We want them to shift their perspective and understand that where those patterns are and what's going to happen next because of the patterns. We want them to understand the properties within the patterns and how they play into the structure of problems. We want them to know that patterns sometimes also includes those rules. And those rules are extremely important for our students. But if they can see a pattern, for many of our students who can't remember the rule, and they see the pattern or they know the pattern, then they start to develop their own rules that go along with it. But then later on, we have to talk about the opportunities to master that structure and just be able to gain number sense. I mean, that's what we want for our students, is for them to have number sense. And we want to provide open-ended questions that purposely request that they look for patterns and look for the structure of a problem. So, Johnny, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, that's excellent.
Okay.
Hey, Stephanie, I think you just removed it, but I think when that paper's over the mic, it might be causing a little bit of echo.
Okay.
That sounds
Sorry.
good. I think actually the way you are right now is good. It wasn't bad, just tweaking it.
So we also want to look at MP7, right? The look fors, please.
Sorry.
It's okay. So if we're looking at the look fors, why does this happen? That's the first question we probably need to ask our students in finding a pattern or a structure, okay? We also want to make sure that we, like I said, again, we're providing those open-ended questions. We want that to happen for our students. And a big thing is students to be flexible when they're looking at this, okay? I think those are probably the biggest parts of our look fors. And then asking the students, do they see a pattern within the problem? So that's my big thing on the look fors for that one, because I think I went over all of it beforehand. For MP 8, this is look for and express regularities, especially repeated reasoning. I can't say enough about the fact that this is about calculations, again, over and over again, providing students with methods and shortcuts. Those need to be later on. They need to develop their own shortcuts. We need to make sure that they really understand the math, but also we need for them to see what's happening within the math. And so if we start looking at that, one good way is after we've taught this conceptually, and I'll go back into the conceptual part of this, that it is concrete, semi-concrete, which is representational, and then abstract. And I cannot say enough how high that is on Hattie's effect size. You're talking about 0.75, and that's huge for Hattie's effect size. We want to make sure that we're doing that, because if we are, then we're really touching all of our students. But an area that we want to look for is we want students to maintain oversight of the process. Again, process. they're attending to the details. And then the other thing is, it's not a final result. If you look at this, it's an intermediate result, right? It's not final. And so one area that you can look at is teachers using worked examples. Now that's different from working an example. With a worked example, we provide students with the completed work, and we ask them, what do they see happening in the problem? And so it'll be line by line exactly what the students should be doing. And then at that point, they look at a specific area inside of that and say, hey, what is this? Yes, somebody said area analysis activities as well. It's very much the same, but worked examples are great for our students to do this. And so that's just one of the areas that I really think that we need to make sure that we're looking at. Now, let's look at the look fors on this one. And if we look at the look fors, of course, we're going to have predicting, we're going to have assumptions, we're going to look at how do you prove it. We're going to talk to our students about looking at the patterns with inside numbers, with inside tables, with inside graphs. They're going to be able to see overall process of the problem. Again, like I said, if we're doing error analysis or if we're doing worked examples, we're going to make sure that they can see that process. And then we're going to make sure that we are providing a sense of experiences for all students. Like I said before, if they need it, we can move all the way back to the concrete. Many times we need to do that. But we're always going to start with the concrete and move forward. So that is my take on the MPs. If you are looking for any extra, and I'm just going to say this, any extra things that you may want to dive into, this is a wonderful book for you to look at. So NCTM has the principles to action, and it goes back through all of the MPs. And it also talks about the teaching math practices. So the math teaching practices is another area that we will not get into today, but we're going to give you some examples that you're going to do. We are actually going to demonstrate how to use Desmos for some of those people who've not seen it.
That's good.
So we're going to look at, of course, our Kentucky academic standards, and we're going to do a little matchup game. Now, remember, in this activity, we are just choosing, right, for what is the, kind of like in our standards, you see like MP4, MP3 down below it for that standard. So we've got a little activity here to where you're going to look at the problem that's created or the situation that's created, and you're going to determine which one of the MPs actually go with that. So one of the things you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go to Desmos. And so again, it's www.desmos.com. This is a graphing calculator, calculator that you can do a lot of activities on. And you're going to be the student. So you're going to go down here. Johnny, they can't see me. So will you circle the student part down here where it says join your classmates? So you're not the teacher today, you're the student.
Oh, I see. Yeah, okay. So
Yes.
Students join your classmates.
And you're going to put in a code. That's where you're going to go to. And we're going to show you the code on the next page. So again, I'm going to put Desmos in here so that everybody can see it. I'm going to put our link to it in the chat. So if you're having trouble.
And then Stephanie, while that's happening, let me make sure that I understand. So there is going to be a problem that students would be posed with, a mathematical problem, and you're going to review
You're going
those
to choose which one of the MPs go with that.
with that. Okay.
And we're only choosing one. So keep that in mind. So you're going to have 8 of those. You're going to have, it's going to be like task A, task B, task C, all the way up to H, and only one gets chosen for each one. Now we're going to let them work in groups if they want to, but you can do this on your own. It's your choice. And I'm going to, when we come back, you can choose a grade level too while you're in there, because we've got all grade levels, and we got high school, set 1 and set 2. So you can choose whichever one you want. Put in the code, which is right here. I don't know who, I think Doug put that in there. So Desmos is in there, and the code is in the chat. So it's Q68QNG. It is kind of particular about uppercase and lowercase. So make sure you put it in the way it is, put that in the students, and the activities are there. Like I said, just join and you can choose which one you want to start. You will see different ones there that you can see. So they're all there. Just choose one and go through it, choosing those standards. So you'll see like standards for math practice grade 8, standards for math practice grade 7. So all the way through there, just choose one, open it up and get started.
I always struggle with this activity. I think it's hard. I think that it's hard to decide which one goes where because you sometimes see more than one.
Oh, do you not remember when you and I were going through a couple of these cards and we were like, well, this could be this and this could be this. And then we were having to pick just one. And it was kind of hard to determine just one because you can see multiple things that you could do with that one task. And this is why it's so important later on when you talk about your task as to, am I able to use multiple of my math practices in that task? And so we're actually touching more students that way.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we need to adapt tasks for students. So that's big too. Actually, I think we were just talking about that in the hallway about adapting tasks so that a student can truly show their understanding. Like I said, also, if you've got a different one, it may be that when you're looking at these, there are multiple ones. Many of our standards have 2 or more math practices that go with that standard. There's a reason for that. Activities can have 2 or more. We were looking for one that really touched that activity for the best possible one. That's the reason why we were only having you choose one. But Johnny can tell you, as we were going through this and we were doing some of these activities, we also noticed that it could be, sometimes was it 8 or was it 1? We were having questions about that. And so many times in a task, you will have multiple math practices you were doing. And we want that for our students because especially with our special needs students and our tier 2 and tier 3 students, those students need different opportunities inside of a task. So you're going to have multiple opportunities inside that task. Also, a big thing is, today you're going to receive a copy of, your standards. Of course, we've already posted those up there and stuff. And we're going to talk about, the S&P descriptors, and they're on pages 11 through 14. So you're going to see, you'll see those in your standards. Another thing is, your task today was to determine the cluster that was attending to the standards for math practices. The goal was just for you to become familiar. Many times we don't put those first we're looking at just that and how do I get to that? And for many people, we teach the way we were taught, right? And we think that that's going to work for every student, but it doesn't. We want to make sure that for our students, they have that opportunity. Every student in the classroom has the opportunity to learn. So like I said before, having those manipulatives ready for our students to be able to grab wherever they're at, and it not be an issue in your classroom for them to be using. This group may be using bead strings. This group over here may be using Unifix cubes. This group over here may be using just paper pencil because they're doing number lines. That's fine if that's the best way for them to learn and to explain it. Having all those opportunities gives them multiple strategies to use inside that classroom. So another thing is, don't stick to just one type of manipulative. I'm going to say that now. In mathematics, multiple types of manipulatives so that they can truly describe the math and they can transfer that knowledge. That's the other thing that we have for a lot of our students is they have trouble transferring knowledge when they go from a concrete manipulative to just drawing it. That's why we say they need to do the CSA model. The other thing is, for many of us, we go straight from concrete to abstract. That doesn't work for all kids. It does work for some, but we really need to make sure that we are going from concrete to representational, whether it's tally marks that they're using, dots that they're using, but they're drawing out what they've seen with the manipulatives. It's a better way for them to start to create that image in their head. And that's what we want them to do, is to be able to transfer that to their mind to where they can start seeing the math in their head and then going on to the abstract. So let's make sure that students have all those opportunities.
Thinking about this activity that you've just done, any opportunity for our teachers to just spend a little time discussing, maybe even they have disagreement about this particular practice goes with this particular problem, all of that still adds to a greater understanding of the practices. And it's probably a part that most struggle with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're past that.
Oh, we're past that. Well, okay. So we're bringing everybody back and let's move on. I actually talked about the next slide already, so you can just slide on past that one too. So let's do the math teaching practices. At this point, we're talking about.
Where do you want me at?
Right there.
Okay, sorry.
So this goes along with our SMPs, but this is what the teacher is doing. And for many of us, we didn't even know there was the standards for math practice, but now we have teaching practices. So these are the things, and they work side by side with that. We have, Johnny, if you'll click on that hyperlink there at the top, I worked with Ms. Vonda Adams last year, and I so wanted our teachers to, did it bring it up, Johnny?
Yeah, I'm trying to bring it over.
Okay, to share. You'll have to share that part of your screen. We worked and talked, and I so wanted our teachers to really get into the standards for math practice and understand how all of that links. So we created this document. And so in this document, which is available to you in your participation guide, a resource today, we have this opportunity for your teachers to really dive into those. So of course, the math teaching practices, as we know, or as we may not know, they work together the entire time. So math teaching practice 1 is establishing goals and focused learning. We talk about our I can statement. We talk about our working objectives. We talk about different things that we can do to get those things going for us. So what the teacher does is what we've got first there. And it looks very similar to some of the things that you're going to see in our look fors, because we took that document and we used it too. What the student does, this is giving you both things that should be happening for that one. On down below that, you'll see that there are questions for teachers to ask themselves when they are actually creating these lessons. They're looking at the task that's going to be there. And then what questions should the students, we should ask our students. We want both of those going on. So at this point, we need to make sure that we're looking at that. And then, I don't know if you've looked into them, but the high leverage practices, these are very important for our students to dive into, and for our teachers to dive into, is those high leverage practices. On top of that, we have connecting to the standards for math practices. What does this one do in connecting to those standards? And as you can see, the first teaching practice actually connects to all of them. Now, if we go back down there, we're going to see 2. And with 2, I'm just going to quickly go through this. You're going to see implementing a task to promote reasoning and problem solving. Again, the math practices below that you're going to see. It's set up like this completely through. Also, it has a section here about adapting that you'll see. It has videos for the high leverage practices. All of those are hyperlinks. Those are videos that you will be able to look at and use. So take this, use it in your PLCs, talk to your teachers with it. It is yours to use. It's a guide that we came up with, and I've given it out to quite a few teachers, but there's links and those kind of things in there. And it kind of breaks it down for our teachers a little bit better than trying to go find all this stuff and bring it together. So that's what that's for. Those are the math teaching practices, and I just wanted you to have that resource available to you so that you can use it within your PLCs. We've got Luke asking a question. Sure. Just wanting to know if he could ask.
Thank you. I'm thinking of our newer teachers here, and looking at this document, it looks helpful, but do you have any recommendations on how to implement that in a PLC? Like if I were to just give this document to teachers and say, make sure you do these in your lesson plans, I very much doubt something's going to happen with it. It seems a bit overwhelming. So do you have any recommendations or best practices or things like that on how to use this document most efficiently?
One of the things that I usually do is I ask teachers to bring a lesson with them if they're going to do this. And then we kind of go through and say, how does this lesson fit into the math teaching practices? What did you do prior to? And how many of these did you actually touch on during that time? I also talked to the teachers about before this questioning techniques. What's your questioning techniques in the classroom? Those kind of things that kind of helps to get this started. Like I said, it is basically just a resource for them to have. I tell everybody, put it in the front of your lesson plan book. That way you have the questions you know that you're going to need to ask. You're going to know the questions that you need to ask yourself. Is this touching on a particular standard? Did that help?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You know, Luke, something that there's always benefit in is you plop something, like if it's a small group, it depends on the size, but if it's a small group, you guys plop this down and say, okay, you know, this is a resource we've got. How can we make use of this? And you guys even plan together how to make use of it and just involve them in that process. That can even be something to do, and it probably even helps build camaraderie between you. That was just something I thought of.
And also, if you're doing a math coaching situation where you're going into a classroom and you're doing coaching, you can mark some of the good things on here that you've seen happening in that classroom, and then mark some things of, hey, the next time I come in, let's work on this one. And so they can have just a guide for some things to add to, you know, their teaching style that they have. This helps, you know, with that coaching part too. And this is, well, that's just basically the importance of that balance between, we're going to, you know, making sure that we have a balance between the practices and, again, the standards. And we should see those practices going on every day. I'm not saying we're going to see all of them, because not every lesson requires all of them, but we should see several of them going on within our class. And then, of course, we know that that component of the architect, you will see the SMPs on top of every standard. They will be there, they're linked there. You can go to them at any point. And then, of course, being able to identify those in the classroom and what's going on when they're implementing tasks. That's going to be a huge part. Now, Johnny, how much time do you want to give them to write in something here that they're going to do individually and then as a team?
We were going to do like maybe 5 minutes a piece on this, and I know that that's not an adequate amount of time, but let's practice this breaking out into going into breakouts once again, and that'll give you a little time to maybe at least talk as a team about the architecture, about the practices, and what might be your next steps, and trying to think about that in terms of addressing district needs. And Jacob, are you still on?
Yes, sir.
All right. Does that sound okay, Stephanie?
Sounds perfect to me.
Okay, well, let's try, everyone. Let's try this breakout of 5 minutes, and you guys that'll remain in the main room, we can kind of have a discussion that Stephanie and I can help with. And then we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Like I said at the first, let's just join together and try to help each other with discussion. I know that each of your districts are different, but you're probably already kind of thinking some different ideas, or maybe some particular needs, or maybe just stray thoughts related to these two things. We didn't really give you time to think about and discuss architecture as much as I would have liked, but we've also had quite a bit of work with the mathematical practices. I think that mathematical practices are probably the most obscure piece of the standards, and it's something that's hard to address with teachers, but maybe if someone would be willing to share just some thoughts that they're having currently about these first two pieces.
I'm happy to start with the standards for mathematical practice.
Thanks, Luke.
It seems like you could apply every single one of them to every single standard. So I'm frustrated by them because I don't know. I mean, we're told in the standards, you know, which mathematical practice fits for which cluster, but it does, like, it seems like students use all of them, right? So I guess I just don't know what their purpose or how to effectively use them without getting hung up on that fact.
When Stephanie was alluding to when she and I did this, and I walked away kind of feeling the same way. Now, don't let me slant others' opinions on that too with this either, with Luke's comment, but I was frustrated also because I do see how so many of them can apply in so many different situations. And so the way that I've tried to kind of resolve this in my mind is, and it's a tough balance when working with teachers about, the productive struggle piece also, just like we have with students. You don't want to push them to the point of complete frustration and disengagement, but at the same time, you want something that can engage them in at least what the mathematical practices are, and this notion of balancing the mathematical practices across everything that they're doing. Not that you'll always be doing all 8 every time, but that you're engaging in those. And so I think it almost goes to an awareness and then an intentionality about trying to incorporate practices, and being aware of what they are. But in terms of one practice for, say, one standard, I get frustrated too, Luke. And so it's probably that engagement piece of, where is that productive struggle, frustration piece, but at least still it gets teachers talking about them and involved with them and knowing that, hey, I need to have my students at some point doing these kinds of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I think it's sometimes focusing on the trees and worrying about the forest later.
That's what I did, and I kind of got myself in a circle of frustration with them that way. Yeah.
I think the big thing about the math practices is and they're there and they should be used throughout lessons, but the teachers are probably already doing most of these. It's just, can I add one more thing to my list of things? But for good instruction, right, we need to make sure that we're touching on them, especially for those kids who are tier 2, tier 3 that need that extra dive that we need to make sure that we're giving.
And I know with like KDE's initiative with the standards too, they've actually emphasized, as part of these types of trainings that we're doing today, that the standards for mathematical practice is a focus. And there's a reason for that. What you just expressed, I mean, I think teachers struggle with this piece of the standards probably most. Any other? Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I believe that whenever we meet with teachers and we actually go through the mathematical practices and let them see that they are indeed implementing these within the day, we may not have put a name with it or, kind of brought that out like we did our I can statement or our standard, but we are doing that. And I think that helps the teachers to feel better about, what they're doing in the classroom. And I also, we really started diving into this a couple of years ago before COVID hit, with our math teams, is just making the awareness of it. But then also, these are things that the teachers and students are doing physically in the classroom to be able to meet those standards. So they go hand in hand. So it's not an individual idea. They have to use them together.
That's really well put, Sarah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Suzanne Henson from Pike County. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
We just want to jump in for a minute and first of all, kind of brag on our county. Several years ago, back when the standards first came out, we actually took a jump start on this and took every single standard and lined up the mathematical practices and actually developed our curriculum document for our schools and our teachers. And then today has just been our group of re-looking at the importance and reminding ourselves we do have so many new teachers and how the mathematical practices are so much a part of our student achievement, and how we're going to get our students to be masters of our content is by using the practices as well. We really love the student-friendly language, that the document that you gave us that had the practice, and then it just kind of broke it down into the, what does persevere mean to students? What does, thinking abstractly mean? And giving us that student-friendly language, I think it's going to be something that's going to be great for our future. We do have a representative here from every single grade, well, not grade level, but kind of like a pod. And our plan is to have PD with teachers across our district on nothing but exactly what you're going over today. And it has been very informative. So thank you so much.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. And that's a great plan for how this might move forward in your district. And we're just so glad that we can provide something that's going to be useful to you. with mathematical practices, and I guess we're probably getting close to time, but with mathematical practices, when you guys did do your curriculum maps and things like that, did you have a particular way that teachers were annotating that, or that they were including that in the curriculum maps, or was it more of, like we said, an awareness piece? What did you guys do?
We actually had a team of IDLs that actually came in, and we took every single, I mean, we spent weeks and months and years actually on this, and we took every single standard. We took the Kentucky curriculum document, and we just kind of broke down the standard. We worked as a team to say, okay, what mathematical practice could we possibly even see that could possibly work here? Then we gave the teachers those tools, like we wrote them in the little, kind of like an extended version of the curriculum document from Kentucky, but it was just more in depth, to where our teachers had, if you walked into a classroom and it was your first day, let the standards guide you. Here's kind of like a roadmap of what you need to do to make sure your students are successful in that grade.
Fantastic. And you know what, every time I visit topics like this, I begin to think about that little adage of, don't give someone a fish, but teach them how to fish. And so this notion of these discussions that you had when you were doing these kinds of things, it becomes intuitive, or it starts to be internalized with the teacher to where they start to think that way. And I think that's probably what we're all after, isn't it?
Absolutely. We had to become the students ourselves. We had to learn this so that, ultimately we want our students, we know our students are successful when they can teach someone else. So as a teacher, we had to become the student as well. The standards was our content. Mathematical practice was our content. We had to master it to be an effective teacher, to ultimately give that knowledge to our students.
Yes, absolutely. Does anyone else have anything? Stephanie, aren't we close to that 5-minute mark? It's 11:43.
Yes, we are.
So Jacob, you want to just go ahead and bring us back? I think it'll do 30 seconds once he starts that, and then folks will start to reappear. Maybe get at some comments from the group before we move on, Stephanie.
We can, if you want to, if they want a waterfall in the chat, we can do that, with some plans that they have for the S&Ps.
Yeah, that would be good. We can try that. So I think, I'm not seeing everyone back almost. Yeah, here they start popping up. Okay, so
Rachel's pretty little face pop up there, so.
Hi, Rachel. Okay, so
Do I sound
go ahead.
like a squirrel still?
No,
No.
you're good now.
Oh, okay. Great.
It was a chipmunk, by the way.
Oh my gosh. My computer does that sometimes. It's crazy. I don't know why. It's crazy.
Let's see, Letcher County. What is Letcher County put? Johnny, I think we're in the main room, but I've turned the volume down. We're having some good. Oh, okay. So Letcher's still doing some discussion. While they're doing that too, maybe just a couple of folks, maybe give us some ideas about what you discussed in your group about moving forward and the things as to how to use information this morning, but then also in chat while they're doing that. If you're not going to share verbally, just please feel free to go ahead and throw some ideas out. And right at the end of discussion, we'll just ask you to hit submit on that. So at Waterfall, let's see, now that works, Stephanie, by just simply saying that don't hit send until I tell you. Is that what? Okay. And so you can type that in, but if you wouldn't care, maybe someone share some thoughts that you had in your breakout room.
I think they're all typing for the waterfall.
Oh no, I shouldn't have given that as an option.
So Johnny,
Go ahead,
since everybody wasn't here for a discussion, we talked about the fact that they will not see all of these in every lesson. All the math practices will not be in every lesson, but one of the things that we do need to look at is that the math practices are probably already being done in most places. That it doesn't need to be scary for the teacher. It needs to be something that they look at and say, what can I add that I'm already doing? And so that may be an area that they want to look at first.
Absolutely. One thing we discussed in the main room too, I hope I'm not overlapping what you just said too, was that the mathematical practices, we can get in circles of frustration with them thinking that, more, because when you do an activity like the Desmos activity, you can see where more than one mathematical practice may go with the problem. And so you can, just like when we teach something to our students and we're, the old term of productive struggle, we're trying to get them up to that point to where they really engage and things stick, but we don't want to get them so far along that frustration point that they disengage. And so we've got to think about those things with our teachers as well. But the other thing that came out is we talked about, in the process of working through these kinds of discussions and looking at each standard, Pike County was sharing about how they had worked with these, with their curriculum maps and their curriculum creation for the district when the standards first came out, that it's those discussions that kind of start to become intuitive and internalized in teachers so that when they are planning lessons, planning assignments, planning assessments, that they start to think like that. And those 8 mathematical practices are things that they make sure that they're trying to incorporate throughout their curriculum. And so in that way, it can almost be most beneficial in that we're internalizing it for them. And it takes time and it takes a lot of activities to do that. And that's kind of the whole purpose of activities that do push that discussion, is for it to be internalized. So anything that can cause them to do that can be a big help. Anything else to add? It looks like we've had several. You can go ahead and add to chat if you've been typing and put that in. I see, yeah, I fear that a lot of teachers use only the standards, not the practices, which hurts the students with having a more concrete learning. Some need to focus with the concept they are learning. Absolutely, Cindy. Yeah, so Rebecca says SMC, so standards for mathematical content, are more about what we teach, and SMP, standards for mathematical practices, are more about how we teach to engage students in learning. And so the resource that Stephanie shared with us about, teacher practices and how that connects to the standard practices really resonates with what you just said. See Jodine here from Breathitt, it says the focus has been on teaching the standards that the SMPs have unintentionally been overlooked as far as intentional planning. Yeah, I do think we work with SMPs when we teach and assign tasks. I'm wondering if it would be beneficial to use the SMPs to help construct success criteria for lessons. I can see that, absolutely. Okay, is everyone, have you got anything else to share? This is an ongoing process and just something to initiate with you. And there's no way that you'll get done today, but it's to help you to think about how these two things can be used and hopefully have some resources. Okay, Stephanie, you got anything else to add on this? This next part is this success criteria is just simply saying that we're going to start looking at breaking down a standard and then the assignment review protocol. But the first thing is breaking down a standard. And let's go ahead and jump so that you can see where we're getting these things. So all of you may be familiar with this site. You may have been familiar with this site and not realize that during the pandemic, the State Department has been adding a lot to it. And so kystandards.org is available and focused on all our subjects in the standards work. And so you see highlighted in red circle here, your standards resources. And so if I go to the next slide, I think it's actually a couple of clicks in to see this. You would have to choose mathematics and then you would see this page. But all of these things are available on the kystandards.org site. And so we can see highlighted in black circles the standards themselves, which you can download as a PDF. But then the other two circles are the things that we're going to highlight for the last part of our training. And so breaking down a mathematics standard, the little eyeglasses is the symbol for that. And then a magnifying glass for the assignment review protocol. And we're only going to choose one standard to look at today for simplicity and to help us run through this as a train the trainer kind of model. But there in this slide, deck is also 8th grade standard, but you're going to see us skip over that each time. But we've still included the slide so that you can have that to use how you would see best fit for the situation you're in. And so the standard we're going to look at is the 4th grade number and operations fractions, standard 1. And we're going to focus on it throughout, but that's on page 86 in the standards document. But we downloaded that as a PDF also in your participant resources folder. And so you may want to open that up and have it as a tab to pull up, or have it on a separate screen or something like that. But you'll want to keep referencing that as we work through it. And then grade 8 is there, but we're going to skip over. And then this goes into talking about breaking down a standard protocol. Let me go ahead and skip actually to it. Okay, so this is the document. So if we had went to the, what was it, eyeglasses there on the kystandards.org, we would have had this document. It's also in your participant resource. But when you first look at this, you think, well, that's one of the standard clusters that we've been looking at earlier when we were talking about architecture. They made this look almost identical. Well, it is identical to how that looks in the standards itself. And so that was intentional. But one of the first tasks we can see in breaking down a mathematics standard is just simply identifying, if we're looking at this particular page on this particular cluster, is identify what domain is involved, and then also what cluster. And so that's a pretty quick exercise once someone understands it. But if they're still learning terminology and those kinds of things, it can take just a minute for them to get up to speed on that. So let's kind of start looking at each of these pieces separately. And so that was what this slide was about, is what I just said, is that we're going to focus on those things. So the first questions for you, and this one we can do pretty quickly, is, what is the domain? Conceptual category. Now that depends on the grade level. If it's high school, it's going to be possibly conceptual. It would be conceptual category. But then what's the broader understanding the standard plays a role in building clusters? So if we're looking at a particular standard, then what cluster does it fit within is what they're trying to say with this. And so again, this marble analogy, like we said, of a light shade of red, which one does this marble fit in? And move forward. And so just elbow partners is what we called this, but let's just kind of maybe do this quickly in discussion, and you guys help me with it, is what is the domain for this particular standard? And I'm going to get it out in front of me also, so I can see this. And so what is the domain, and then what's the broader understanding of the cluster itself? And so we're looking at KY4 in F1. And so could somebody look at that for me and tell me what is the domain for this? Just entertain me. I think this is not too bad, but this will let me know that you're getting to the standard and that you know where to look.
Okay, the domain is number, operations, and fractions.
Very, very good. So that's at the top of our page on page 86 of the standards. And so if we remember with our overviews, that was that row of domains. And then under each domain, we had those clusters, didn't we? Okay, and then what's the cluster?
That's extending like fraction, equivalence, and ordering.
Okay, so extend understanding of fraction, equivalence, and ordering. So those two tasks are pretty simple for our teachers to get started with, and that's very doable. And it's just a matter of knowing where to look. But it's like I always told my students that it's easy after you know how to do it. And so we can see that when folks did this, this can be something that you can show if you're doing the train the trainer model, or I mean training with teachers. But I see grade 4 expectations in this domain are limited to fraction denominators. So if you look at the top of the standard on page 86, you do see it say that it is only denominators of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 100. And so that may be significant because if we're looking prior and after, and then like you just told me, number and operations, and then extend the understanding. So move on past that. And then grade 8, we can skip because we're going to let you do that later. And then what we'll get into, and I think we're very close to lunch, it's 11:57, and we'll start this afterwards, is this other part of breaking down the standard that's about targeting the standard. And there's 3 things that we think about with that, and it's conceptual, procedural skill fluency, and application. And Stephanie's going to help me some with procedural skill fluency with that elementary background. But we'll talk about the meanings of those, and then get into trying to bring that out of this particular standard and examine it to see what we think the target of this particular standard is. So we were into the breaking down the standards document. And I'm going to back up just quickly, just to remind you what we've already done before lunch there with this particular instrument. And so the first part, I think we gave you an overview. Let me see. Yeah, I was wanting to give you just the, yeah, so here it is. So this is the actual PDF, and that's in your participation folder. And so you can pull that out and have that to the side. It's also on the kystandards.org. And I'm sorry to continue to clear my throat. I'm one of these people that has allergies. I know that can get aggravating. But we had looked at what is the domain and what is the cluster, and you guys helped me with that. And so we saw with this particular standard, which was KY4NF1, that the domain was number and operations fractions, and then the cluster was extend understanding of fractions, fraction equivalence, and ordering. And so that's just a matter of teachers getting engaged and finding where information is. But the next part, we have to learn a little bit more about identifying the target of the standard. And so this is under the blue column in that document. And so we have 3 targets. And again, this is a little bit like the standards for math practices. You know, sometimes we'll identify just one of these when you may have an argument for it being more than one. But our goal here is to identify which target this standard hits most. And so when we look at this, we're thinking about, is it a conceptual understanding standard? Is it a procedural skill fluency standard, or is it an application standard? And so let's learn about those 3 things first before we talk about the rest of this column. And so with conceptual understanding, probably all of us could have gotten close to this definition just thinking about concept and so on, but we know that it's more than knowing isolated facts and methods. It's also the why. And so more than knowing the why, how do we make sense of, and so why is that particular mathematics working? So, you know, more than just memorizing 2 + 3 is 5, but why is that, and why does that work, and those kinds of things. And then can I place that in a context? So can I use it to solve something perhaps real world? And then can I connect it to prior knowledge? And so all those kinds of things go into conceptual understanding. And you know, I've often thought about, you know, what forms first for students, and sometimes we have students that they almost work with conceptual better than anything, and they almost begin there and they want to know the why. But then we have many times students that they just want to know the answer and just tell me how to solve it. And so we do have those tendencies ourselves, and sometimes they may start in that skill-based notion, but then they build the concept. But this notion of why is what we're dealing with conceptual. And yeah,
Johnny, can I throw in here?
Absolutely.
Okay, so when I think of conceptual, I think of the students who can really discuss what's happening in the mathematics, and it's the kids who are procedural, or I think of procedural as, you know, they're really good at doing algorithm, or you can show them a way and they're like, okay, I can plug those numbers in and I can do that. And so those kids, what happens is they hit a block when they have to explain it. And those are the kids who have a lot of trouble later on getting into taking whatever happened prior to, pulling that in and understanding how that's going to fit into this new math. And so you'll see those kids get into algebra and they're like, I don't know why this is happening, because it's no longer a plug and play kind of situation.
So in other words, if we don't move them to a conceptual understanding, they're going to have a hard time being able to make those next steps. And okay, and then procedural skill fluency. And this is defined in your standards, and it's at the beginning of the document, but ability to apply procedures accurately, efficiently, flexibly, and appropriately. I don't know, you know, depending on how long you've been in this, I remember a time in mathematics that they actually were de-emphasizing procedural skill. And so we've kind of come full circle back to an emphasis that those things are necessary. I remember I always use the example in my physics class. There was a, I can't remember what the name, but like a space probe type thing that was being sent out into space, and it was supposed to actually intersect and interact and land on an asteroid. And if I remember correctly, I hope I'm remembering those details, but there was a mistake in the calculation where instead of using our British units for this for acceleration of gravity, I think they had used, or maybe instead of using scientific units, they had used British units for gravity, and they completely missed the target. And so we've kind of come full circle to these things are still important. And so speed and accuracy in calculation as well, and helping students to do that. But now Stephanie's got a much better grasp at the elementary level with this. And you want to add anything, Stephanie?
I will. Actually, one of the things about procedural skill and fluency that we really look at is, are they efficient? Can they carry it out easily? Now, they have to have that conceptual understanding behind this. If you think about it, to be able to carry it out, it's how often they've practiced with a skill to start to be truly fluent at a skill. And so we go back into, why are they doing the conceptual understanding of it and having to explain and understand how to explain the things? Because like we have said before, and we've heard other people say, if I can explain it to somebody else, or I can teach it to somebody else, then I'm usually very fluent at that. And we want them to get to that. But fluency, if you notice here, is also flexibility. It's, I've got a couple of strategies here that I can use. I may be faster with one where that speed comes in, right? But I'm accurate with all of the strategies that I have. So I have that flexibility to do that. And so that's a big key component with this, is I'm flexible in what I can use. And I also have multiple opportunities to be able to choose a strategy or to get to an answer. But the other thing is, I'm accurate with it. Just like you said, I know the units, I know how to do the conversions. That may be a part of it. It's the same thing with skills. Whether I get to long division by doing the algorithm for long division, or I use a partial dividing, it doesn't matter which way I do it, as long as I'm accurate, I'm efficient at it, and you know that efficiency brings along speed. That's my take on it.
I had it muted. I said excellent. And as a former math teacher too, I remember those arguments about, you know, years ago in math that, you know, teacher taught it one way and they wanted you to show the work. And I don't have any problem with showing work, but if you didn't do it that way, you missed the problem. And so this notion of being able to be somewhat more flexible in how students get to the answer is important. And that's kind of emphasized in what you said, and especially with our students that are needing extra attention and have special needs. This gives them a way to still get to the answer, but possibly in different ways. And there are differences in students. So procedural skill fluency is, so we've talked about conceptual procedural skill fluency, and then if I can get it to go, application. And so application, we know, takes something that we understand in mathematics, and then it applies it to a context. And that context has to be relevant. So it's not something that students feel is contrived, but a relevant context, and it's meaningful to them in that way. And so application is, I guess the way I think of it is it's the highest level of mathematics that we can perform in that sense. And you know, I've often said that I don't see how you really can reach application without having traveled through procedural skill fluency and also conceptual. But again, as I've said, sometimes we're trying to identify which standard is, you know, most applicable to one of these targets, and so we may choose one just because it's most applicable to it. And so those can be discussions that you have with teachers.
And also, Johnny, in this one, it's developing that critical thinking, just like it says at the bottom. There it is. Can the student reason through the problem? Can they do they have the critical skills that they need to actually complete the problem that they have? So making sure that they have that. And you'll see this in the appendix part of our standards. There's problems that are set up for addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, and that application part, that's the critical thinking problems that are there. That's a good place for our teachers to really look and see what kind of problems are going to get to that critical thinking part.
So often, you know, time and just trying to get to the next topic, we come up short sometimes in that. And you know, the thing that probably gave me the best solace or comforted me the most as a teacher is someone finally said to me, as we were talking about things like this, they said, look, you don't have to go there every day with this, but you got to go there. And so that's the notion of application too. And so all right, so we got 3 targets. We've got conceptual, procedural skill fluency, and application. And so the notion of breaking down the standard is that you look at this particular standard and you consider which of these does this standard hit. And it's okay if it hits just one. It's okay if it's just procedural skill fluency, because that has its place. But we also want our whole curriculum to be able to hit all 3 at some point, and then it be a balanced approach. And so we're going to look at this grade 4 standard and the KY4NF.1, and we want you to think about which ones of these 3 does this hit most. And then what key mathematics should students know and be able to do is a secondary question in this section of breaking down the standard. So these 2 questions is what we're after. Let me go and see what slide. So this slide is just saying simply what I just said, that consider which target, and then what would students need and be able to, or need to know to be able to do this. And so here is the standard, and we're going to do a quick breakout with this and give you time to just kind of discuss this as a group. We'll keep the main room open too, so we can talk about it a little bit, and then we'll come back together and move forward through the breaking down the standard. But Jacob, have I got you still with me?
Sure do.
All right. If you would, let's move guys to breakout. And so we're answering the portion of which target, and then what do students need to know to be able to do this standard. And then we'll come back in 8 minutes. I think this is the hardest part with trainings like this, is if you're not every day in the math classroom and you're having to kind of revisit in your mind. We tried to choose a 4th grade standard, and you guys with Train the Trainer, you know, you're going to adapt depending on what kind of audience you have. But basically with 4th grade, we can see that we're dealing with fractions. We're dealing with denominators that can be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, or 100.
I think that's why that note at the top is so important. Many times they don't realize what the denominators are that they need to be keeping it within.
Exactly. And there is a difference we'll see as we keep working through this, as we look at 3rd grade versus 4th grade in regard to that. So it is important. Equivalent fractions. later we'll actually talk about a misconception, but it seems like I can never talk about equivalent fractions without thinking about some of the first misconceptions students have. And what, maybe to get us talking, what's one of those first misconceptions that you maybe run into as a teacher, or you even as a student, when you remember this? You know, if I say 1/2 versus 4/8, and I say which is bigger, you know, what is likely the answer I'll get when a student's first learning this? Somebody help me out.
A lot of times the students in my class, they would assume that the 4/8 was larger just because the 4 and the 8 were larger digits. So that was a misconception. And I think a lot of that's before they actually visualize it or have that model to look at.
Exactly. And just because the numerator is larger, or the denominator as well is larger, we think of it as larger when we don't have the conceptual. And so if we don't start in the conceptual, then how does that work? So visual models, we can see there in the standard that 1/2, 2/4, 4/8. If we look at that visually, each of those fraction strips have half of that visual model shaded. And so I can think about that those all three are equivalent because I can literally see it. And so that concept, that helps to build that concept with that. And so explain why a fraction a over b is equivalent to a fraction n times a over n times b. And so that's going to get to the notion that if you have 1/2, I can get to 2/4 by multiplying both the numerator and denominator by 2. And then I can multiply by 2 again to get to 4/8. And so it builds some of those ideas. But when I'm thinking about conceptual category versus procedural skill fluency versus application, just in that little bit of understanding of what the standard is trying to address, what do you think? And as with all these kinds of things, there's no wrong answer. So I want you to feel comfortable with that.
I don't know if it really answers your question or not, but I was just thinking also, even in relationship with the models, a lot of times the students will have half, but what does that half mean when compared to other models? So it depends on what your whole looks like too. You know, comparing, I used to do an activity where I had a Hershey bar and I say, well, I'm gonna give you half of a Hershey bar. Well, I gave half of a miniature to one and then half of a whole bar to another. And, you know, there were some discrepancies there, but, you know, whenever we talk about a half, it does depend on what you're starting with, what your whole looks like.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, that's a good one for sure. And so the larger candy bar, I assume they would think that half is different than the other half because it's larger, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that's great.
You can do that also with strips of just cashier's tape so that they can see what's the difference in a half in comparison to the whole and let them compare. It's really good to do that.
Yeah. This is a topic that's ripe, and you know, this continues right on. I taught calculus in high school, and then they continued to have, you know, issues with things around fractions, and so this is something that continues on. Volume is another example I think of in science that's like this one, because shape and so on in terms of volume and densities and so on.
My big thing for this one, if we're looking at this one, is that using that fraction model. When I think of models, what area do I think of? Is it procedure? Is it conceptual? Is it procedural? Or is it application?
So that's what we're after on this standards breakdown. Is it conceptual primarily? Is it a procedural skill fluency target primarily? Or is it application? And we remember when we were looking at this, that conceptual was more than knowing isolated facts, you know, why it works. Is there context? Can I connect it to prior knowledge? Procedural skill fluency, you know, ability to apply procedures accurately, efficiently, flexibly, and appropriately, speed and accuracy. And then application, context for learning, relevant, meaningful, critical thinking skills. And so which do you think this standard is? Just thoughts about it. Which would it lie most in, or do you have reasons for that? This is always hard, I know, because you're having to take a leap of faith, but what do you guys think?
I'm thinking it's conceptual.
Okay. And so conceptual, what do you guys think as to why it's conceptual?
Johnny, when I think of conceptual, and you know, my thoughts are a little different being from the special ed world, but I think of that visual model that they're actually creating. And so they're creating a manipulative, and they're having to explain it. So they're making sense of why this is happening inside the mathematics. That's the big key. And then again, part B there, when I've talked about that and or that's in there, that part B has them to explain a fraction is equivalent. And so they can actually take those, and if they're using fraction squares, or they're using fraction strips, whatever they may be using at that point in time, they can lay those over each other and determine why 2/4 is the same as a half. They can see how 4/8 is the same as 2/4 is the same as a half. And so they can build that not only just by drawing it, but they could actually build that using, again, visual models.
So when I think about procedural skill fluency, what would be an example of something that's procedural skill fluency? Would it be as simple as, Stephanie, 2 + 3 is 5, or is there a better example?
Yeah, I think it would be, if I was a good example of the procedural skill, you could go down in there and say that it's equivalent, but it's in this part, they're just explaining why they are equivalent to each other. And if I was looking at procedural, then they would actually say it would be 1/2 if I times both of those by 2, then I'm going to get 2/4. And I would start to, at that point, talk about equivalent fractions in a multiplication standpoint.
So I can take 1/2, multiply the numerator and the denominator by 2 and get 2/4, and I'm able to efficiently and accurately do that. But do I understand the concept that 1/2 and 2/4 is equivalent? And the visual model helps me to see that concept. What about application though for this one? Would it be, or why not?
If you think about the definition for application, can you apply that here?
So does it have a context that's relevant and meaningful? And so when we think about application, we're thinking about maybe actually applying this to something. So I was just thinking of maybe Sarah's example with the candy bars. You could almost expand that to say that, you know, you had 2 friends, you know, and they didn't want to be unfair to one another, you know, and how would we work through this? It starts to provide a context for how you'll use the mathematics to answer this question. And that's a very simple one, but what do you think, Stephanie? Is that a start?
My thing with, if I was connecting this to application, the big thing about application is it has to have some real critical thinking. So how much critical thinking is really going into this one here? I'm not for sure that we could tie this into a real critical thinking, just because look at your clarifications on this one. I'm not for sure that we can tie this one to that.
Gotcha. So when I think about critical thinking skills, I've got to have the ability to reason, to adjust what tools, what mathematics I'm using based on the situation. In other words, it's not necessarily right out in front of me what it is that I'm to do. And so this one maybe not quite getting to that level yet. Could fractions and this concept be extended to something that's critical thinking? I would think so, in terms of a real world context, but probably not the way it is.
Yeah, and in this one, we're asking to use models to generate the fraction. We're not really asking them to find a solution at this point. So I think this is definitely not an application one.
So
It's no longer than 8 minutes.
Okay, yeah, we'll go ahead and bring them back. As he brings them back to the main room, we got carried away, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But we would say this one's conceptual primarily. And I think I forgot, was that Shelley that helped us with that? And so thank you for that. But yeah, this would probably be more conceptual. Yeah. So we'll bring these guys back.
And you can explain to them why.
Oh, I can explain. I was hoping to have help with that. Maybe someone in the group.
I thought too much already.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, I think we're back.
Uh-oh, I heard that.
We're back.
We got a little carried away and I think we let it go over a bit. So I apologize for that. I think all the folks, yeah, it looks like we're all back. And so we were trying to answer in our main breakout room with folks. We were talking about what standard this was, and then what key mathematics should students know and be able to do. So we talked a little bit, just trying to get familiar with what the standard itself was. And then we went out from there, and we probably answered it best by trying to explain what it was not. And that's how we maybe got there. But maybe just some thoughts from the group. I'm just going to leave this open to you, and I need help. Give me help. Just thoughts. There's no wrong or right with this. Maybe what you discussed in your breakout rooms. Probably focus most on first, conceptual, procedural, or application. And I know it depends on your background in mathematics too, as you feel uncomfortable with this, but step out on that limb for me.
Well, it seems like I'm always going first. I feel like if I don't go, we're going to be here all day.
Uh-oh, sorry, Melissa.
But I don't know if we took the approach differently in my little group, but I always have to pertain it to how our district is. So that's kind of how when we answer a question, that's what we're talking about in our breakout room.
Right.
Fraction, and it's funny that this is a fraction standard because that seems to be a very difficult concept, but I used to teach 4th grade, so I'm going to say like right here, I tell you what I did. I go all the way back, and I not necessarily didn't have to do this, but some students need it, to 2nd grade when they had to partition a shape.
Got it.
Okay, you got equal parts. You started there. Then in 3rd grade, you're using those visual. Actually, I pulled out fraction strips every single time. And, and we would just play with them and pull out you pull out the whole. They need to notice that when all those pieces are put together, they're the same size as the whole that you're comparing it to. And I always used to give the analogy of if you have a small pizza and a large pizza, and I would divide them in half. And because they would say, well, a half is a half, it's equal. I said, well, look at this. Which pizza do you want? And then they'd be like, oh, I get it now. The holes have to be the same size if you're comparing. Okay.
That's excellent.
And then actually have them line their little strips up and spend one whole day. We wouldn't even pick up a pencil, but just, see what equals a half. And that's where I would start. It would equal a half. And you would say, oh, and then they would start moving their pieces. Well, if I had 2/4, that's a half. If I had 3/6, and then I would have one kid that would say, well, if I put this 1/8 next to a difference, that also equals a half. Aha. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So all that would come way before anything else. And then you would go into what was that look like on a number line? And as Stephanie said, you should be using a number line from kindergarten. I would say put one in preschool, but I'm not over preschool.
Me too.
But I would think put it in preschool and then let them see. They have to get used to partitioning number lines into equal spaces. And that's something that has to be practiced from day one.
Gotcha.
But that's kind of like where we talked about how our students sometimes miss things because all this might have been skipped over.
Absolutely. So that really answers our question, what should students know and be able to do leading into this? And so what's our thoughts on the target? Is it conceptual? Is it procedural skill fluency? Is it application? So we talked about, and I'll try to help, we talked about with procedural skill fluency. So for example, if I have 1/2, if I multiply the numerator and the denominator by 2, I get the 2/4. So if a student can take and multiply 2 to the numerator and denominator and get 2/4, do you think they know this conceptually? Do they know conceptually what fractions mean, or that these are equivalent, if they can do that?
I'm going to say no.
So
I would say no on that, because that just because they can do a math problem does not necessarily mean they understand in their head what has actually happened and can actually draw it out, write about it, talk about it, just like learning a foreign language. That's what math is. You have to be able to do it all.
Gotcha. And so if being able to perform that procedure, this obviously there's more to this, because they're being able to understand that these are equivalent through visual models, right? And so it goes beyond that. Is this application? So application, we remembered, was about context, relevance, critical thinking skills. So is this in a context? Is it relevant to a real world situation? Is there higher order critical thinking skills going on in understanding that these fractions are equivalent? So the thought, and I think I remember, Stephanie, what was the application that you gave? I was thinking there was an example in their group.
Oh, for hours? Is that what you're talking about? What did I use for application?
Right.
I said, if I'm looking at the definition for application, it means that it has a context for learning, it's relevant in a meaningful way, and it has to make sense in reasoning and critical thinking. The thing about this is there's not a lot of critical thinking. There's a lot of modeling. There's a lot of doing as far as this, but there's not a lot of really true critical thinking going on. So it can't be application. And the other thing is, at this point, we're just dividing these little fractions up into models. We can talk about the fact that they're real world, or we can relate them back to it, but it's not asking us to do that at this point.
Gotcha. And so trying to answer which is it by what it's not, and it does seem to go beyond just procedural skill fluency. It doesn't quite go to that notion of application where it's actually in a real world context with critical thinking. Critical thinking skills we know takes reasoning, takes us choosing paths that are not necessarily apparent to us, but we have to think through and get to that solution and reason through it. And so it does seem to hit concept in the sense that students are, if they truly understand and are able to do this standard, that they're going to understand that equivalent fractions can be shown in visual model. And like you said, that has to have the same whole to truly be able to judge that. And so probably would label this more conceptual.
Well, Missy said it best when she said that just because I can work a problem out does not mean that I can explain it. And in this case, there's two parts, and I talked about that and or the ABC parts of a standard. In this case, they have to explain why the fraction is equivalent. They also have to understand that they have to be equal. It has to be, each part has to be equal inside of that to the whole. And so that's going to be a huge part of them being able to explain this, especially the same size, and understand that. For my kids who are special needs, I'd probably pull out some graph paper because I want them to be able to see this. I would definitely have a measuring tape out at this point, so we could be making the same size lines. Those kind of things needs to happen for our students.
Absolutely. So let's move on. And I do see Jodine had a comment that I missed in chat, and she says that she's mathematically challenged, but she's going to go out on a limb and say conceptual. And so I think we would agree with you. The next slide, I think, with the folks that had worked with this prior, they had a similar answer to what we were just coming up with. And so that's something that you can use in your train the trainer model. Grade 8, like we said, we're going to skip. That's something that you can do and adjust based on what who you're working with. The next part of breaking down the standard is clarifications. And so we see what are the specific representation strategies that will need to be considered when planning instruction. What are possible misconceptions? You may have even already got into that a bit. How does this standard build off of prior learning? How does this standard support future learning? How does this standard connect to other standards or even other clusters or domains? And so you're really looking at this coherence piece and then what it's saying about the clarification of the standard. And so these next two slides, depending on what you've done with folks, you could probably skip. And so what this is talking about is what we already talked about in the architecture, is just how these pieces in the clarifications go together to help teachers be able to follow hyperlinks to previous and future and then within grade level. And so that's very helpful. And so that's what both these slides will do. So that may be something you choose to leave out. And then this slide is just really breaking down or boiling down what we just said about this clarifications portion and looking on the coherence of this. And so we're looking for specific representations or strategies. We're looking for possible misconceptions, overall progression of the standards intentionally. And we're going back to the fourth grade prompt. And we're trying to answer those questions by looking at the standard. And so if I click on this hyperlink for KY3 NF3, then I get this. And so let me give you just a second to read grade 3, or at least get a little overview of this. What I want you to think about is what is different about what's learned in grade 3 versus what will be learned in grade 4. So when I look at this, I see that A says understand two fractions is equivalent. I see recognize and generate simple equivalent fractions, why the fractions are equivalent, writings or drawings. That's looking a whole lot like what we were looking at in grade 4. Express whole numbers as fractions and recognize fractions that are equivalent to whole numbers. So if I'm talking about a whole number, I'm talking about like the number 3, and 3/3 is a fraction. Or I mean, like that would be like 6/3. I'm sorry, for like the 3. Compare two fractions with the same numerator or the same denominator by reasoning about their size. Recognize that comparisons are valid only when the two fractions refer to the same whole. So we heard that earlier. In talking about this, we can compare them as greater than, equal, or less than. I look over to the clarifications and I see these fraction strip type models. I see a number line. Again, fraction strip and differences in terms of equivalence, in terms of greater than, equal, or less than. But then I get to this bottom part, and what is different about grade 3 versus grade 4? I see that this is denominators of 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8. And if I look back at grade 4, I see that, yeah, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8, but I don't have 5, 10, 12, and 100. And so one of the key differences we can notice with this is that the denominators are different. Now, Stephanie, is there anything I should add in terms of that difference?
No, and that's actually when you look at your standards, it's actually at the top usually, right, either right there with the cluster or at the bottom there in the clarifications. So sometimes you'll find it right there in the cluster.
Got it. And I see Melissa added in the same thing. Look at the denominators. And so that's our key difference. And so looking back, that's what we see. And so if I look forward to grade 5, I'll just kind of help walk us through this. It says efficiently add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators, including mixed numbers. using reasoning strategies, counting up on a number line, or creating visual fraction models. Some of that we've already dealt with. Finding common denominators, using a common denominator, and in general being able to add fractions with unlike denominators. And so we see that this is going further. We're not just looking at fractions to see if they're equivalent, greater than, or less than. We're looking at, and we're seeing that we're going to have to be able to add and subtract fractions. And so we know that's where they're headed. Anything to add there? So we were going to do a breakout, and I'm going to think about this. Let's just look at this together as our time, I know, is getting a little short, and let's think about this together with this. So we were going back. I'm going to go to this. So specific representations or strategies need to be considered when planning instruction around. And Melissa did a really good job earlier of talking to us about visual models. And those kinds of things need to be happening first. And but possible misconceptions. Is there anything else we should add with that?
One of the things that, for most kids is in that case in which they're going to be representing it, making sure that they can draw and understand everybody gets the same amount. And so that when they're drawing those little lines, that they have to be equal distance apart. And for those students who have trouble, I'm just going to throw my special ed part in here. That's where that graph paper comes in play. That's where that number line comes in play that they may need, and some kind of a measuring tool that they may be using.
Absolutely. And then in terms of overall progression of the standards, that was kind of what we were talking about the before and after just now, is that we see that there's a difference in denominators from third to fourth. So we need to be aware of that. We know that they're already maybe been exposed to the 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8, if I remember correctly. And then with fifth grade, we know we're building them to be able to try to add and subtract fractions. And so being able to be proficient in that to get to that point. So let me jump to some thoughts that the folks that had done this prior had put. So what are specific representation strategies? Students using visual fraction models to subdivide the pieces into smaller equal size pieces. That was what you explained. Students are taught a trick like the butterfly method. So possible misconceptions, that was something that I don't think we've come up with yet. But you may teach them the butterfly method of trying to get like denominators, and then they really not understand why the fractions are equivalent. Do you have anything with that one, Stephanie?
I will say, I call those tricks, and I say they are great, but it takes away from that student's ability to be able to explain what's happening in the mathematics. On top of that, with many tricks, there are multiple, and this is coming back to my special ed, but there's multiple procedures that they have to do during the tricks. So during that time, for our students who have trouble with working memory, one of the things that they can't do is they can't remember the next step that's in the trick. And so therefore they're going to have a wrong answer. So one of the things, the best thing that you can do is allow those students to develop that, again, conceptually, like this is talking about, through visual models, whether it's fraction squares, fraction strips, but also providing that model in multiple ways. So don't just give them fraction squares all the time, or don't just give them fraction strips all the time. Allow them to actually cut up some paper and do these kind of things, because that's the only way they're going to develop that conceptual understanding. They have to have different models.
Exactly. And then how does the standard build off of prior learning? How does the standard support future learning? You can see that they've referenced what we looked at, the grade 3 standard, the grade 5 standard, the difference in terms of adding and subtracting. They didn't make note of the different denominators, but they did talk about that grade 3 was already working on equivalent fractions. And then how does the standard connect to other standards or even other clusters or domains? Now that's something we didn't talk about. And you notice that they reference KY4 NF2, and they mention that this is in the same cluster. So when you're breaking down a standard and we look back at the standard itself, don't forget that this standard is not in its isolation, but it's within this cluster of extend understanding of fraction equivalence and ordering. And so we can see that the NF2 says compared to two fractions with different numerators and different denominators. And then we use the symbols of less than, equal, or greater, and then recognize comparisons are valid only when the two fractions refer to the same whole. So we talked about those things, but that's exactly what we're seeing in this second standard with the cluster, and that's the reason those two are grouped together. With this particular standard, I don't see a standard listed within the same grade level, but one thing that we know that will happen with this too, though, is like with decimals. You know, this is all leading into decimal work and things like that. But these are the kinds of conversations that your math teachers are going to be able to pull up and be thinking about because they're doing this. And so is that one okay? Go ahead.
On
Stephanie.
top of that, Johnny, anytime you're working with fractions, you're also getting into that measurement part. So keep that in mind that you're working with something students will be using for measurement. That's the reason why I keep on bringing back the number line. That's important for our students.
Absolutely. Okay, so with the breaking down the standard, we've almost through this document. So if I keep moving forward, this goes through grade 8, which we're going to skip today, and then we're going to go to this portion. This is the last part of the first page of that document about breaking down the standard, and it's attending to the standards for mathematical practice. And so we remember, and Stephanie, you want to just take this portion where you did spend it with the mathematical practices. What it's asking us to look at is the look fors and question stems. It's reminding us about that. And then their question here is simply, what are mathematical practices that relate to this standard, and how might you work with that in the classroom? And then we've got the list of those 8 mathematical practices for reference.
One of the things that they're going to look at for this one is how am I going to engage those students in doing that? So again, we're going to look back at what was in there that was conceptual, right? What are the parts that were conceptual in my math practices? If I'm looking at that, we talked about MP4, MP7, and MP8. That's the ones that they talked about the most in these, right? That's not always, there are others, because it talks about the fact that if you go down to the bottom where it's attending to the standards, one of the things I like is it showed the set model, it shows the area model, it shows the number line. I'm going to be the first one to say that set model can be very deceiving for our students who are struggling. They see that as their disconnected parts. So the area model is a little better for our students who have any kind of a learning disability or who are just struggling, because one, it looks connected. And the same thing with a number line, it's on a number line. So therefore it's still, again, connected. That set model kind of puts that image in there that it is disconnected. I know we have a tendency to teach that set model first, but that can be an issue for a lot of our students. But I would look at, one of the things they're going to do is model with mathematics. They're going to use a visual fraction here and model, and that's a big key for us. They're going to also connect it, right? So we're looking at those two. And if you, Johnny, flip on up there to MP7 and MP8, and we'll talk about those real quick. We're going to look for make use of structure, right? That's MP7. And so if I'm doing that and then repeated reasoning, I'm going to see that multiplication that's happening, because our kids at 4th grades already went through and understands multiplying by 2, multiplying by 2, multiplying by 2, what's happening each time with that. They're going to start to see that repeated reasoning, that pattern that's in there. So that's really good for our students to be able to see that visually and then understand what's going on. There's my take on it.
Excellent. And anyone else, you jump in there with those. And so some of the notes with this that you'll have with you in your PowerPoint is just what Stephanie said, MP4, MP7, and MP8. And we see that some of those same things mentioned, like she said. And so look for use and make of structure. We can see how 3/4 is equivalent to 9/12, and these were some of the notes. But this is a good place to engage teachers in discussion about which practice is best fit for this standard, and it helps them in thinking about their lessons, their assignments, and also their assessments, because all of that goes together. Okay, and grade 8, we would just do the same thing. We'll skip that. And then on the breaking down the standard document, there is a second page. And that second page simply asks these questions. And so this is really more of an extension. And so this may be something that you choose to use, you don't choose to use. And so, you know, in what additional ways might your team envision students engaging in the mathematical practice for this content standard? You know, you've kind of already had that discussion with them on the front page, but, you know, this is almost a second take. Is there more that we can think about with this? And what are additional coherence connections? So that's maybe a deeper dive than simply looking before and after, but also looking within the grade level, and maybe even trying to have a little bit of discussion about maybe something that's not even shown in the standards that committees didn't recognize. You know, there may be things like that. Include any notes you and your team might utilize internally to provide additional clarifications for this standard. So it's kind of a decision on your part as to how this might be used. Does anyone have anything to add as far as the usefulness of the second page? So breaking down the standard, and something we said at the first of the day is, you know, it may be that you don't go through something like this with every single standard, and you don't have time to do something like that. But if you can get teachers involved in this process, and then actually working through this together, and it becomes internalized, and each time that they look at a standard, they're going to start to think about some of these questions. They're going to be thinking about what mathematical practices, what are the misconceptions I need to be looking at? Is this a conceptual standard? If it's conceptual, or if it's procedural skill fluency, how's that affect the lesson I'm going to have on this? How's it affect my assessment that I'm going to have? And that's something we've not even talked a great deal about. So all of those things start to become internalized, and something that can become a great piece for professional learning for them. Is there any questions or additions to that?
Johnny, I will say, if they're looking at these standards and they're breaking them down, the other thing that they may want to add to this is, what vocabulary am I going to be needing to teach at that point in time? And then make sure you look at what are some misconceptions my kids can have, because you may have to back up, especially for a small group of students, and reteach or actually teach some things that they're missing out on that's going to get them to this point. So vocabulary is extremely important, and that's one key feature I wish we could have added to, or was added to our standards, so that we knew what vocabulary needed to go with that right off, especially for our new teachers. But in your case, you'll need to go back and look at that and tie that in.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Okay, so yeah, at a time like what we're in, being able to think about a standard and think about efficiency, thinking about what is it that I'm going to have to help support the students, because maybe you've already talked to that prior grade level and you already know where some of the weaknesses are of them coming in. And so as you're breaking down this standard, you already have that information, and you're also thinking about what is it I need to support. And so that's all part of this. But that's an example of something that you could work through with teachers and help them to internalize that. So the next thing that we've got, and it's the last thing, of course, I do have takeaways from this. Let's just see what comes up. It says value of identifying the target of the standard. So takeaways from the standard, breaking down the standard document. One is that, yeah, we identify the target. So conceptual, procedural, or application. And then power of discussing and predicting misconceptions. Those are all things we've discussed. And then importance of utilizing the coherence vertical alignment component. And that's that notion of before, after, and within grade level. Keep moving. Okay, and so we do have a portion here of you guys talking in teams about how this might be useful. And in terms of breaking down a standard. And so maybe I don't know, Stephanie, we're running close on time. Is this something maybe we just do a couple minutes with? So
I agree.
I'm not going to move you into breakout sessions for this, but I guess my question is this useful to you? when you think about your district teams and what you're trying to do? Or is there ways you would revise this, or how would you maybe plan to use this?
I think it's a really good systematic way to break it down, regardless of where you are in the standards. And we talked about that in our breakout room, regardless of where your district is or your own personal understanding of these standards are, by using this train-the-trainer model, by going through, we talked about, bringing things to our next DILT meeting and how we were going to utilize and what were the best things to hit. This is a great organizational tool that'll put that into organization for us. It provides focus and organization that's needed, regardless of where you are in the standards. And we talked about every time, it doesn't matter if you're a master or if you're a new teacher, every time you go in, you learn something new, or you have a new idea or a new activity. So what's great about this work is it's a continuous learning process, and these resources that you've given us today are definitely going to be beneficial.
We're glad for that, and so well said too, because this is, and that's something I've not said a lot, is it's a living, breathing document. I mean, every time, like you said, you go into this, it's something new, and lots of times it depends on the people around the table too, and that changes, and it can bring new perspectives, as well as just the fact that our world keeps changing and our curriculum keeps evolving. Well, we're glad that this maybe can be a help. And so let's go ahead, because we are at 2 o'clock and we may actually can get some of this with the assignment review protocol. I was concerned about that a little bit. So the assignment review protocol is the last piece of an extension to breaking down the standard. And so you're kind of doing some of the exact same things that you were doing with breaking down the standard, but this time you're very focused on a particular assignment that you have. And so I'm just going to skip over without looking at this assignment review protocol, and then let's come back to it. This is the assignment we're going to actually look at, and we're going to look at this in terms of KY4 NF1. But take just a moment to read this assignment, and then we'll talk about it together real quickly, just so you're not walking into this blind on what we're reviewing. So we've probably had time to at least skim this, and it says, what fraction of the rectangle below is shaded? And so I realize that there are, I believe, 12 squares, and I've got 3 that are shaded. And so I imagine that that's 3 out of 12, which I know would reduce to 1/4. So about 1/4 of the table is shaded. Laura says that 1/4 of the rectangle is shaded. Do you think she is correct? Explain why or not, why not, by using the picture. And so even before we get into this assignment review protocol, it says, do you think she is correct? So when I think about mathematical practices, which one would that probably be hitting maybe the most, or at least directly? And so I don't think I have a quick slide to jump to. So I see that MP1 is make sense of problems and persevere in them. I see 2 is reason abstractly and quantitatively. 3, I see construct viable arguments. 4, okay, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. And that was the portion I left off in saying that. And so MP3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, would seem to be a good fit for mathematical practice with this. So do you think she is correct? Explain why or why not by using the picture. Now, what about this explain why or why not by using the picture? So these boxes are shaded in different portions. And so for her to get out of this that it's truly 1/4 by a visual model, what would the student probably have to do to justify their reasoning in terms of explaining why? So what do we think about that? So maybe I would take these shadings and I would put them together in such a way that when I put 4 of them together, it makes the whole table. I could show that visually in that way. So just trying to give you a little idea of what maybe the student would do before we think about this assignment review protocol. Stephanie, is there anything I should be adding to that?
Well, I also think this it's MP2 where it's reason abstractly and quantitatively. They're going to have to know how to move those around. And so if it's a student who pulls 3 of those out and just puts them, let's say, in the first column, and they're like, that doesn't work. And so they need to understand where they need to go also at this point. So we need them to be able to break this apart and know where exactly that the solid ones need to go. Now, if we're giving them the opportunity to, at this point, either redraw it, or we're giving them the opportunity to have some squares to where they can do that and just move them around, you know, it could change the task itself. But if that's something the student needs, then we can do that.
Right. And you notice that if you put the 3 together, say in an L shape here, that the only way that I can understand that this fits together is the L is reversed, you know, or mirrored, you know, that it would fit that. And so there is some abstract reasoning and thinking about that. But if I had this cut up in pieces, it kind of changes it to maybe less abstract in terms of the visual notion of it. Does that make sense what you're saying, Stephanie?
Yes. And I want them to be able to just think, okay, I'm going to move all of the blue to the top line. And then at that point, that's going to become one solid. And then that's 1 out of 4 pieces.
And so just the top line, and then it's easy to see that it makes the whole. Yeah. Great. Okay, so that's the task we're looking at. And so this is in relation to the standard 4. And we're going to look at this and say, does this apply to standard 4? And so the assignment review protocol, there's a folder in your participation resource Google Drive that has this. And this is from TNTP, and that is the new teacher project work. And I think if I remember correctly, it's about a 3 to 4 page document. And so when we look at this, the very first part of that document is what we see below here. Of course, there's a link to it here as well. And so the first question says, does the assignment focus on 1 or more grade appropriate mathematics standards? And so the question is does this assignment deal with the grade 4 standard that we've been looking at? And of course, there's the rest of the protocol. And then grade 8, I want to go back to grade 4 just so you can see that once more. And so grade 4 standard, remember, was understand and generate equivalent fractions. We're talking about the fraction model. And so when we think about this particular assignment, do we see the makings of that standard? And so we are talking about equivalent fractions. We are talking about visual models. We're talking about being able to tell that things are equivalent in that way. So would we maybe agree that this could go along with standard that we've been evaluating? Okay, and so for the assignment review protocol, I could probably pretty quickly jump that this is pretty well aligned to that particular standard. Now, when you're doing assignment review, it's not necessarily just one standard. Is that good to say, Stephanie, or are we trying to focus on one with this more so?
Usually it's a target of a standard, so it is just one.
Yeah, so this one we're looking at the 4, the grade 4 that we've been evaluating, and it says, do all questions in our task reach the depth of grade appropriate standards using the following criteria to guide your thinking? And so section 1, target of the standard. Does the task match the target of the standard, conceptual understanding, procedural skill and fluency, and or application? So we remember from this one, when we broke down the standard, that we said that that standard was conceptual. And so when I look at this particular problem, can I think to myself as I evaluate this, that this is also conceptual? So I'm going to leave that one maybe as a question for you guys to help me with a little bit.
This is really good to use with our teachers, especially your FMD teachers that are having to look at those standards, because I've used this with them to say, hey, are we meeting all parts of the mathematics standards in the task that you've got at hand? Because before, one of the things that had to be done was our FMD teachers had to keep a working folder. And in that working folder, the task had to be aligned to the standards. And so in that working folder, if the task did not align, then it needed to be removed. Or sometimes they would have it and it wouldn't fully be aligned. This is a good way for us to be able to go through not just our special needs, but also our regular ed to say, do the task I have for this standard actually align?
Excellent. And so with this one, I see that this assignment is likely conceptual as well. I mean, we're looking at it in terms of procedural skill and fluency. This is more about the concept of equivalent fractions. Now, here's the question though, is this an application assignment? Is there application in this? So I can see from our previous discussion with application, we know that application needs those critical thinking skills. It needs the reasoning involved. It needs a context. This is really void of any kind of context. There's no real clear purpose or a real world solution in this. And so it doesn't seem to extend the application. And so it does seem to fall squarely on conceptual with that. And so as I'm looking through this again at the review assignment protocol, I see section 1, target of the standard. I would have marked this as yes. This does seem to fit the target of the standard because of conceptual category or conceptual understanding.
I look at this one at this task, and one of the things that I see is it understanding equivalent fractions. Is it understanding and generating equivalent fraction? If I looked at that, because we're looking at Kentucky for fractions and one, and it's understanding and generating a equivalent fraction. Do they do that? Do they use visual models in that to recognize it? Yes, they do. And then the other one was part B. And if you're looking at that one, it says to explain why that person is correct or incorrect. Part B says to explain why a fraction AB is equivalent to the fraction N times A over N times B. So if we look at that, this does exactly that standard.
Both A and B.
Yes.
Okay, as we keep looking through the assignment review protocol, this slide could be rearranged depending on what you want to do with your district, but this is a summary of what the assignment review protocol includes. We just went through part 1, section 1, target of the standard. And there's a grade 8 example you can work through. And so we've answered this first question. Does the assignment focus on one or more grade appropriate mathematics standards? Yes, and we picked the one that we've been working with. We think this is a conceptual understanding assignment, which does align with the standard. And so these were some notes from the slide of how they answered that themselves as well. And then we see 8th grade working through the same thing, notes that they had on that particular example. And now we're to the section 2 of this protocol, coherence. And so we remember coherence from the architecture of the standards can deal with the previous, the future, and then also within the grade level. And so looking across grade levels, is there a coherent connection to the same topic in a previous grade? If so, is the task crafted to elicit a more sophisticated level of understanding that would have been acceptable in the previous grade? So what we're doing is we're looking back to grade 3, which if you remember was very similar to grade 4, just in the denominators. And we're thinking about, does this assignment extend beyond grade 3? Because if it's just asking the same kinds of things that grade 3 would do, and we're trying to target a 4th grade standard, then we know that there may be an issue with the assignment and we want to revise or just scrap depending on what we're dealing with. And so with this particular one, I think this was what, a denominator of 12 because we had 12 blocks. And if I'm remembering correctly, that is grade 4. Grade 3 did not include grade 12 or a denominator of 12. And then also this notion of equivalent fractions, visual models. And then like Stephanie said, also with the B part of the grade 4 standard, the assignment is doing that. And so we looking at this, I think it would answer that, yeah, we're on grade level with this. And then it says, is there a coherent connection to another standard within the current grade? So is there a coherent connection to another standard within the current grade. So what about thoughts for that? So I see that in our cluster that had KY4NF1, there's KY4NF2. And KY4NF2 says compare two fractions with different numerators and different denominators using symbols. And so if you remember, that question is when we just do 3 blocks out of 12, the second question said is 1/4. And so we have to be able to know that the equivalence of 3/12, what equivalence there is to 1/4, and then be able to explain that. And so that's a direct connection to KY4NF2, which is the second standard within the cluster that we were looking at. And so that could be one thing we could look at. Anything to add there? And then when we see that there are notes that are going to say some of the same things that we probably just talked about there. If you do notice, they do reference grade 3, grade 5 in terms of the previous, like that, what we had looked at. And then they do also reference that NF2. Okay, so that's section 2, coherence. You're looking at that. And remember, we were looking at these kinds of things when we broke a standard down, but the difference is we're actually looking at an assignment and seeing if it is aligned to the standard. And then grade 8, the same thing could happen. And then section 3 of the assignment review protocol is cognitive complexity. And so this is a new notion as far as today for us. And we see conceptual complexity, procedural complexity, and application complexity mirror what we were talking about with the targets of the standards, but we notice that there's low, medium, and high descriptors here, which is a difference. This is another level of understanding for us. And so we know that this standard was labeled conceptual. We've agreed that this assignment is also conceptual, but our decision here now is to decide, is this assignment going to fall within a low level 1, a medium level 2, or a high level 3? And this becomes very important because what can happen to us as teachers is we can tend to float in one area and not any of the others. And so we know that the high level 3 can be an area that we don't maybe visit enough, or maybe we're always staying down in the low level 1. And so some of those kinds of things can happen, and that's probably a good reflection of so-called teaching to the middle sometimes with that. And so when I look at conceptual complexity, which we know is what this particular standard and this assignment are addressing, I see solving the problem requires students to recall or recognize a grade level concept. The student does not need to relate concepts or demonstrate a line of reasoning. Within level 2, students may need to relate multiple grade level concepts or different types, create multiple representations or solutions, or connect concepts with procedures and strategies. The student must do some reasoning, but may not need to demonstrate a line of reasoning. But then when we get to high level 3, it's kind of like this notion we were talking about with application and critical thinking skills. Solving the problem requires students to relate multiple grade level concepts into evidence, reasoning, planning, analysis, judgment, which is kind of this notion of reasoning, and our creative thought, or work with a sophisticated, non-typical line of reasoning. So in other words, the solution path may not be completely apparent. And so when we think about this assignment, let me just leave it open, is which do you think this assignment would hit? Would it be a level 1, a level 2, a level 3? This may be an exercise too, that sometimes when you read this, you try to eliminate what it's not. You know, with this particular, because when I read that and I think about that, I get a little bit lost in the words, you know, with it. But does it fall into a creative thought or work with a sophisticated, non-typical line of reasoning? You know, I don't think it's going to fall in that. And then when I look at level 1, the student does not need to relate concepts or demonstrate a line of reasoning. I don't think we could say that about it at all. They certainly are having to think about this conceptually, as we know, and there is a line of reasoning. And so by default, also, this is going to be the best description for this is the level 2. And so thank you, Melissa. And so if we've already identified what the target of the standard is, this can help us to kind of quickly move through the complexity. Again, the notion of this is to get teachers thinking about, where am I hitting most? I certainly don't want to live in one area and not all levels for students. Anything to add? So that's section 3. And so then this was an example of someone answering this question, which did agree with the level 2. And then some reasoning like what we had just talked about. Okay, and then grade 8, they worked through a similar example with that, with the complexity. And then we go to the mathematical practices section of this. And so that just like with the breaking down the standard, it keeps hitting these same pieces. And so does the target standard explicitly call for use of a specific mathematical practice? If so, does the task provide opportunity for students to engage in the mathematical practice named by the standard? And so we've talked a great deal about mathematical practices in the standard with the 4th grade, and this assignment is well aligned with it. And so some of the examples that they gave with this was MP3, and they did mark it as a yes. And if we remember, MP3 is construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. And so what they're honing in on, I forget the name that they use, but the student, reasoning is the reasoning of the student, the answer being 1/4 correct. And so this notion of critiquing the reasoning of Laura. And so that's what they're honing on with this. Does that mean that this is only MP3? Certainly not. But does that one stand out because of the nature of the task? Yes. And then they do the same thing with grade 8 example. And then part 3, relevance. Now this one, let's pay close attention to. So remember that when we talk about target of the standards, we talked about procedural skill fluency, conceptual, as well as application. So when we think about relevance, many times that can lend itself to the notion of application. And so does the majority of the assignment consist of word problems or real world application problems or tasks? If the assignment connects grade appropriate content standards to real world experiences, does it also allow students to apply math in a meaningful way? Do the provided scenarios make sense in a real world setting? Do they have to think critically? Does the assignment provide cues? So what are our thoughts on this? Well, the fact that this assignment lives in the conceptual category by default is going to cause you to have to answer this, no. If you don't have an application target, it's not likely you're going to have an assignment that will answer this. And then the question then becomes is if you're trying to target this standard and it's conceptual, if I have an application piece, then that's going beyond at least the standard. Not that you shouldn't, but I'm not going to be able to answer that this is application if it's living in that conceptual world. Is there anything to add, David? Okay, and example that they gave is that no, it's not conceptual understanding, and for the same kinds of thoughts that we were just having. And so grade 8, the same, pull from. And then the last piece of this is actually if you had student work to look at. And so you can take student work and actually work with which students met the expectations, which students met the expectations of the target standards for the assignment. And then you work with, are your student results producing, is your student work producing work that is of the level or at least of the target that you wanted the assignment to do? Because if your student work is not producing that, there's a mismatch. Something is mismatched in what you want to happen. So then you're wanting to think about, how do I revise this? What is it about the assignment that's not causing my students to be able to go to the level that the standard requires? And so that's the notion of this last piece. And so with the assignment review protocol, is it already strongly aligned to the standard? And if you can answer that up front, yes, then you kind of keep working with that assignment. And if not, then what am I going to also do? I'm going to look for ways I can revise it to maybe make it, in other words, is it salvageable? And so as the teachers work through this, that's the notions they would begin to have. And then could another assignment fill the gaps that showed up when examining this assignment? So, many times in our assessments, we'll have a part A, part B, and part C. And, so maybe this assignment is great as a part A and B, but maybe in order for me to really meet the whole standard, I need to add this C part to it to be able to do that. And so those can be things that you can think about. Anything to add to that, Stephanie? Have you got something that I'm not saying?
Nope, you did a great job.
All right, good deal. And then is instruction balanced when considered collectively? And so that was the notion of this complex, or the complexity is, am I tending to focus in one area and not all areas? And so we want to make sure that we're hitting all areas. And so our last takeaways, and we're doing okay on time, and I think we'll be okay with that. But let's give you just a few minutes probably to get together. Let's come back for one last share out, and then let's move out from there. That should give us time. Let's just take 5 minutes to think about the day, think about future steps and planning. Just take us kind of sit back from the detail and think about what is it that we're planning to do next. And then let's use each other to help each other in this last little piece. And so help me to do that. But maybe just 5 minutes to kind of get together with that. Let's go into breakouts, and then we'll come back and share out, and then we'll be ready to go. So Jacob, you on there with me?
They're in their breakouts.
All right, great.
Johnny, when
Yes.
we come back, I'm going to share out the Granite vocabulary site for teachers. I think that's really important for them to be able to see that vocabulary site. Actually, it was Melissa who was like, hey, you might want to share that vocabulary site you always share with my teachers. So since I've been sharing it with her teachers, I'm going to share it with everybody here, and then they can get it out for their teachers. And if you'll give me just a minute, I'll explain that site to them.
That sounds excellent. Is there any pieces from the appendix that you wanted to share?
Yes, actually there is, and I had them marked here. I wanted page 258 is one of them. And that's the fluency standards, so they can know what those fluency standards are and why we want them to be within those standards.
Okay, I can try to get the standards up so that we can pull that up as a shared
I'm going to
screen for you.
send you this one in our chat real quick. This one site. So once I send it to you,
I can pull it up for us to look at.
yes,
Okay.
and we can talk about it.
I see a question from Shelley. Is Shelley in our room, or did we send her to breakout? Yeah, Shelley, you're with us, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay, great. Is this the same as DOK? I think it is very similar. Back with and I should have said this, and I'm kind of in a mode of trying to help you get through this, but there was a link on the complexity that takes you to a document on that slide that has more descriptions of this, but that's what I would refer to probably as most similar is our depth of knowledge. Wouldn't you, Stephanie?
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, Shelley.
Thank you.
And I should have said that because that's been around a while, hasn't it? Okay, and then as far as our room, as you're thinking about this, about the day, about the assignment review protocol, I'm going to ask the same question as I keep going through. Do you think the assignment review protocol is something worth doing, or is it something that needs to be revised, or maybe how would you use it? Those kinds of thoughts.
I feel like we really rushed through the assignment review protocol, and it will be great for them to take back as to PLCs and actually look at a couple of assignments that they're doing to make sure that they are connecting to the standards. And it may be something they want to do once every couple of weeks, just to make sure that they are connecting everything.
Yeah, the assignment review protocol, like you said, with PLCs, this is a great fit for that because you're not going to give it full justice with just one time. And then it's the discussions, as with all this, that seems to lead to that internalization for the teachers. Yeah.
And I think as you do several of those in a PLC, like you just connect an assignment that you're doing with that. If you do that a couple of times after that, the teachers will be like, well, does this really meet the standards when they look at an assignment? And they'll already know yes or no, or what do I need to add to it? Or maybe I can just in my lesson add a talk move to increase this, or I can do a question at the end that's going to change this whole thing. So it needs to be looked at definitely as a PLC.
Once that internalization happens, I mean, truthfully, the work's done because the teacher just continues to look at it through that lens. And of course, I say that the work's done. We know with the standards work, we're always revisiting, but you understand what I mean.
And, you know, this is something as new teachers, as we get new teachers and we get them all throughout the year. I mean, it happens for everybody that you get new teachers throughout the year. There needs to be somebody who's going to go back in and work with those teachers. If they have some kind of system in place, that would be wonderful. That's going to work with those teachers on that standard and how to look at tasks and those kind of things.
Exactly. Jacob, I think you took care of Rachel already, didn't you? She had asked to get put in the Knott County group.
So Tony, can you bring up, I put that in the chat. It's the Granite schools. Yes, can you bring for me to just to talk about, you don't have to bring it up right now. When you come back, just before we end today, let me speak about those vocabulary.
We'll be able to do that. How are we on time?
Well, it's 2:33. How do you think we're doing on time?
So I think I was talking about the breakout. Is there anything that anyone else would like to add in thoughts of planning? I think a lot of you guys have already shared throughout the day kind of the notion of where you're going next. Was the assignment review protocol something that others were already using? That's just curiosity on my part. Is this something that you were already using in your district? So this may be something new to us. The breaking down the standard document, though, has anyone ventured out with it with teachers? I know that pandemic hit right about a lot of the time that some of these resources were coming out, but what about the breaking down the standard? So the first question, we're going to let Stephanie share some things too that she had wanted to also add here at the end. But the first question, I guess, is, is there anything else that you haven't said that you're thinking about with this? One of the questions I asked our group, and it appears that maybe some of this is new, but I'm going to ask this group, is the assignment review protocol new? Like, has anyone been using that already within their district work? Some of these resources came out during the pandemic, and it may not be the case, but has anyone ventured out with it? Okay, and then what about breaking down a standard? Is that a document that you've been able to use yet, or is this new to you as well? So one thing that we had talked about with the assignment review protocol also is that, in your PLCs, that might be a right place to use that. Working through this with teachers one time is probably not going to internalize it for them. And so by being able to, them being able to revisit the assignment review protocol with different assignments in their PLCs, it's going to help that internalization. It was like we were talking that they're going to reach a point where they don't have to literally sit down and do the assignment review protocol all the way through for everything they do. It's going to become part of them in terms of asking those questions. And when they, look at an assignment, and they look at the standard and they think, this is great, but I need to add this. And when they get to that point, it's part of them. I see Shelley says it is new to our school, the assignment review protocol. Okay, good deal. So that may be something that we hope can be useful for you. Okay. And anything else that anyone else would like to add before we let Stephanie finish up with us? She's going to hit on a site related to vocabulary cards, I believe, and then the appendix, and then we'll get you guys out of here. Stephanie, you can take it away.
Okay, so for the site, if Johnny will bring that up for us.
Okay.
This is vocabulary cards, and he's going to slide down until he sees, just slide down there. I want go ahead and click on 7th grade A through M. No, down one. There you go.
I see.
So he's going to click there. And one of the great things about this is as you scroll through and you look at these, you will notice it's got a little thing that's going to tell you about word walls and that kind of thing. But just click on the first one there, Johnny, absolute value. If you look at absolute value, the great thing about this is it has the word. I always talk to my teachers about the fact that, yes, word walls are great if they have the word, but in mathematics, they need to have a meaning to them too. So in this case, there is the representation of it. And on top of that, there's a definition. I love these for that fact. So the student has the ability, if we talk about the Freyer model in mathematics, and I'm one who will tell you I love the Freyer model because it's got examples, it's got non-examples, and those are huge in mathematics. And many of our students who are in that tier 2, tier 3, and special ed have trouble with understanding and being able to do contrasting. So if they've got examples and non-examples, that's wonderful for our students. So having this example is big. Also, I tell my teachers if they want to, this can become a station if you're doing station teaching, because you can take that last one where it's absolute value, it's got the symbol, and then it's got the definition, cut that up, and now it becomes a station of a matching activity that they can do where they're really getting familiar with the vocabulary. So that's my key on that one. Now let's look at an appendix.
Okay, and I didn't have that one up yet. So let me get to that for us.
You're fine.
And
So in your standards, and I know everybody has looked at our standards left, right, up and down, but on page 258 in the standards is a wonderful thing called the fluency page. It's 258, literally.
Computer's trying to catch up, sorry.
You're fine. Technology is our friend until it's not.
Yeah, it's pushing it a little bit with as many windows I have. You said 258?
Yes.
Okay, so here we go.
Yes, so right here is our fluency standards across all grade levels. Now, I really push this when I'm working with elementary that in kindergarten, if we look at kindergarten, we are fluent within adding and subtracting within 5. That's huge because that means I can put together 5 and I can break apart 5. Within first grade, it is within 10, and that's adding and subtracting within 10. And within second grade, it is fluently adding and subtracting within 20, and then fluently adding and subtracting within 100. I don't know how many people will tell you if they can add and subtract within, especially third grade teachers, if they can add and subtract really well within 20, this is huge for our kids when they move on to third grade. So really push that standard of adding and subtracting within 20, that fluency standard. Then on top of that, like I said, it's adding and subtracting within 100. There's actually 2 there. So we want to make sure that they're able to work within that. And we want them to be able to do that with models, a lot of models. So you should be seeing different models of 100s out everywhere. If you're in third grade, this is where it changes. Of course, we change the addition to within 1,000. And then we look at multiplication. And even in third grade, we start to, and at no point here have I said anything about an algorithm. So there should not be an algorithm where it's regrouping or whatever. up until you get to 4th grade. Okay, so even in 3rd grade, we're looking at that place value model and those kind of things for addition and subtraction. Now, also in 3rd grade, that's where that fluently for addition, for multiplication and division comes in. And you'll see that throughout up to 6th grade. So keep that in mind. The algorithm is a huge no-no for our kids because they're not learning different strategies. And when I talk about those different strategies for fluency up to that point, especially 3rd grade, we're teaching our kids to add and subtract truthfully, mentally. And we want that for our students. We want them to mentally be able to add and subtract. Many times, a good way to show this is if I've got parents coming to open house because they're, listen, I was taught using algorithm. You were probably taught using algorithm. We were not taught with the place value. So it's difficult for us sometimes to go back to that. But one of the things, it truly is teaching them mentally. So if you've got an open house happening, hand parents paper money that they can try to count. I guarantee you, they will put the hundreds together. They will put the 50s together. They will put the 10s together, the 20s together, and they will count from the hundreds down to the ones. That's a good time to ask them, if you're going to add money that way, why are we having our kids start in the ones place? So this is one of the things that I will say, looking at these fluency standards, knowing what fluent really means. Remember, they're efficient, they're accurate, they've got some speed, but they're really picking a strategy in which they can use. And the algorithm doesn't come in until 4th grade. So keep that in mind. That's my spiel, Johnny. Thank you.
All right, excellent. If you've got any stray questions for Stephanie about that related to those 2 items, you can certainly ask that now. Biggest thing I want to say is thank you for being here too, and we hope it's been a help to you. We hope that this is something you'll be able to use. We have been recording this, so we'll try to put that back out in a form that you can share with folks. May even be that there's only one portion of this that you want to share with particular people. There's all kinds of things that you can do with that, but we'll put it in a form where it's on a Google form, and then you would have a sign in and then a feedback survey with it as well. And that way there can be ELA if you choose to use it that way. But just please reach out to us for any help that we can be. The whole notion of this also is to be a launch for us to offer our support in things that follow up with this also. And so Stephanie and I both are very excited and enthusiastic to help in that way, and we hope we can. And but other than that, I'm going to give way to the feedback survey. If I can get it to show up, you can use your phone to do that. This will send out automatic ELA. Be careful when you're filling this out. There's already cells that are filled for like ELA number, name of training, those kinds of things. If you were to overwrite, you can just close it and then open it back up. If you do have trouble getting your ELA certificate or anything like that, just email me. And if you completed the survey, I can retrieve that. I can even edit things that if you made a mistake or something with it, and we can get out a final form for you. And so happy to do that.